Welcome back to the Director Dossiers. This episode is a deep dive into the history and our thoughts on the entire filmography of David Lynch. Of course, at the time of recording this, David Lynch passed away about a month ago. And what happened was, about a month ago, I was sitting there going, all right, which director should we do next? Should we do David Lynch? Should we do David Fincher? Because they have, let's say 12 movies. And we didn't want to do another three-parter yet like we did on Scorsese. So I said, let's do David Lynch. I like David Lynch. And then I swear to God, 20 minutes later, I go on Reddit and I saw that David Lynch passed away, which is, obviously super sad, but it gave us a good excuse to really appreciate his filmography this time around.
Definitely.
And do an episode on it and kind of honor his legacy in a way.
Early life. David Lynch was born on January 20th, 1946 in Missoula, Montana, to Donald and Edwina Lynch. Growing up in small towns in Montana, Idaho, and Virginia, Lynch developed a fascination with suburban life, but also an awareness of the strangeness lurking beneath its surface, which would influence his later work.
So his parents originally met at Duke University, and they both joined the Navy in World War II. She worked in Bayonne as a typist, and he was the chief of the engine room on a naval ship destroyer. And he was on the ship during the war, and a kamikaze plane hit the destroyer.
Oh my gosh!
Which I thought was pretty crazy. And also, we talked about the suburban life and how that really influenced him. And of course, if you watch movies like Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, and even Mulholland Drive to a certain extent, that kind of idyllic life is idyllic.
Yeah,
let's say it's right. So, this idyllic life, and then the further you get in the center of it, the more strange and weird it becomes, is something that is very apparent when he talks about memories from his childhood. And I have some stories that are basically just are a good example of what I'm trying to say. So there was one story where he goes, yes, one time I went to my grandmother's house, and she gives me 2 candy bars, and she said, go across town to the Johnsons, and I want you to give old Mike Johnson a candy bar. So I go over there. I go all the way across town. He's like 10. And he goes, I go in there, and there is a 20-year-old man sitting on a tricycle. I'm not going to do the David Lynch impression the whole time. I'm just doing it for the first couple of stories.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, it's impossible. He goes, he was sitting on a tricycle, and he had about the brain of a 3-year-old. And, and I just gave him a chocolate bar, and we just sat there eating chocolate bars, and I did that for a while with him. I would go over there and eat chocolate bars with him, which is, feels like it's just a random David Lynch,
It sounds like something that would just cut to in one of his movies, and you'd be like, what?
Yes, exactly. And then it would never come up again.
Yeah, it would just never.
Also, a lot of the stories I got from this were from Room to Dream. Also, since he died, all the books were impossible to get because they were either sold out or the prices were so high where I'm like, I can't. So what I did is I just got all of them from the library, except for this one, Lynch on Lynch, which is my friend Takio Hori. From my writers group. He's a screenwriter. He's a great screenwriter. He wrote a script called American Infamy that made it. He was a Nickel finalist. And so thank you, Takio, for giving me that book. That was very helpful. But Room to Dream, which is a autobiography. It was the woman who wrote it with Lynch. Her name is Christine McKenna. She writes a chapter about a certain part of his life, and then he writes a chapter about the same part of his life, and you just can kind of compare and contrast. But I listened to the audiobook. And the funny thing about the audiobook is that when the author's talking, the lady, she's like, oh, yes. And then he lived in Missoula, Montana at, 19 whatever. And it's very by the numbers. And then he does it, and he just uses what he wrote as a suggestion. Oh. So he starts out, and I'm expecting I lived in Missoula, Montana. But he goes, I had these 2 great grandparents.
It's clearly just like him.
He's like, So
spitballing over the
exactly.
Over
so
that.
He's reading what he's saying. And at one point, for this next story, he goes, she goes, there was a ski bus that would take people skiing, and I used to go skiing all the time. And I was walking down. I forget the name of the street. In the audiobook, which is hilarious. I'm like, holy shit, this is amazing. And he goes, I was walking down the street and I found a blue purse. And he goes, I opened up the purse, and there was large amounts of Canadian money in it. And I brought it to my dad, and I said, Dad, look at this. Look at all this money. He goes, what we're going to do is put an ad in the paper. And we'll see if anybody claims it. And after like a year or so, nobody claimed it. And his dad goes, all right, you can keep the purse. And then Lynch, he says this. I don't know if it's true. I'm not calling him a liar, but I'm like, there's no way this is true. He goes, and I kept it, and there was about $100,000 in there.
You just found $100,000.
$100,000 in the 50s is like over $1 million, maybe.
Well, sorry. That's one of the things as you learn more about him, you're thinking, is this just one of the luckiest people of all time? You know what I'm saying?
Right, like sort of like a serendipity to his entire life. Not that he was not that he was incompetent.
No,
like,
yeah.
Right, but yeah, I see what you mean. I don't see stories like that where I'm like, I don't know if he's embellishing on purpose or that's actually true and it's just that extraordinary. There was one of the things, in David Lynch movies, you have the highway, the lines on the highway.
Yeah.
Sometimes at night with the car. That's a Kubrick stare for Lynch. It's like a director trademark, the shot of the highway lines. And I think I found the inspiration behind that when I was doing the research for this in his childhood. One night, his dad goes, hey, we're going to go hunting tomorrow. And he goes, okay. So him and his dad wake up at like 3 a.m. and they start driving to wherever they're going hunting. And he said, I remember the headlights. It was all black, and all you could see, the headlights were just illuminating the lines on the road. And I'm like, is that why it's such a strong image for him? And he talks about how he goes, and we were driving, and a porcupine ran across the road. And my dad, who hates porcupines because they're bad for trees, his dad was very involved in. He was like a what do they call him?
Research scientist.
He was a research scientist, so he was in charge of like an experimental forest in Boise. It was basically genetically modified trees. So he pulls over, goes, we gotta go kill that porcupine, and so it's nighttime. And the porcupine like climbs up a tree or whatever, and they're throwing rocks at it. And his dad has a gun, like trying to shoot it. And he goes, and we're throwing rocks at this tree. And all of a sudden, I hear my dad's gun fire, and I'd see this porcupine like doing cartwheels out of the tree, and they killed it. So I think that was the inspiration for the whole highway line thing. But also, we talked about the trees. Trees have a huge impact on Lynch's life, especially from he was younger, because his dad was obsessed with them, and that was basically his whole career for at least a certain portion of it. And if you look at his movies, you see Lumberton, which is the town that Blue Velvet takes place in. You have Twin Peaks, which is a lumber town. The trees are like a recurring theme in the background of Lynch's filmography, which I thought was very interesting. There's one sad story about a dog. Also, if you don't care about these stories, skip ahead. But there's one sad story about a dog, and if you don't want to hear it, skip ahead like 30 seconds. But I think it's a heartbreaking story, but it's a good story. So Lynch, they moved from, I think it was from Boise, Idaho, to Virginia, and they couldn't bring the dog with them, so they had to give the dog to somebody they knew in town, and it was his sister's dog. And he goes, and this dog, it was a great dog, but it kept running away after we left because it kept coming back to our home, trying to find us. And for months this went on where the dog would run away all the time, and then eventually that dog got hit by a car and died.
Dang. Yeah, just random things like that.
Yeah, but also that story is important to bring up because it talks about like this idyllic lifestyle, but also this darkness and sadness that kind of is hidden under that veneer.
That he was kind of presented with.
Yes,
there's a few more. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to cut you off, but if we could get back to the freeway thing, there's another story where he like distinctly mentions the lines on the highway because he was in Boston at college. When he first went to college, he was in Boston, and he ended up rooming with the guitar player from this band called the Jay Giles Band, and they're musicians at that time, all smoking pot. And he said the first time he smoked pot was he smoked and then driving on the highway, and he mentions that all he remembers is that the lines on the highway started getting slower and slower, and he's just sitting there, and they're like, David. He's like, what? And he goes, you stopped on the freeway. He stopped completely still on the freeway. And he's just like, and I remember hearing, like, he was telling that story. I'm thinking, I'd never get in a car with this guy, even just because I feel like everything to him is a movie scene. Because at that moment, as that was happening, I know he was probably like, this would be good in a movie.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
he's just
on the freeway.
Yeah. I don't know if I heard that, but that's funny.
Do you know the one of the naked woman that shows up in his neighborhood? There was he was outside in his neighborhood as a kid, and a naked woman, he was too young to like understand what was going on, but a naked woman just showed up like outside of the tree line.
Yeah, he was walking with his brother down the road, and she showed up, and that was the first time I saw a naked woman. and it wasn't like as exciting as I thought it'd be because she had like bruisers and she was crying, and that experience in his life ended up influencing Blue Velvet. When Isabella Rossellini, shows up at Jeffrey's home and she's all beaten up and walking. Apparently, she walked the same way David said, "Hey, walk this way." So those are just some great examples from his childhood that informed a lot of his movies. In case you were wondering,
that's just the amount of things that happened during his childhood seem even just that experience with the naked woman is a lot different than what a lot of people experience. I could see how all those experiences led to kind of the way he was as an artist.
Yeah.
Growing up, Lynch didn't like school and wasn't a good student, but he didn't know that he wanted to be an artist yet. This led to a stage of rebellion in his life.
In his book, he goes, "I fucking hated school." Bullshit. And he goes, "I have 3 memories inside of a classroom, and one of them that he didn't bring up the other 2, but the one he brought up, he goes, I remember I was outside, cleaning a display case at the school in 1963, and the teacher comes out and goes, David, you should probably come inside. And he goes into his classroom, and they announced that JFK had been shot. And he goes, I remember Judy, who was a girl he liked, she had a horrible reaction to it, and I walked her home. She walked right up her to her room, didn't even say anything to her parents, and she went up there and closed the door, and she didn't come out of her room for 4 days. And Lynch had a previous run-in with JFK because he was an Eagle Scout, and he got to go to JFK's inauguration. So him and the other Eagle Scouts on whatever entrance road, wherever the inauguration was taking place at the Capitol, and they were in the road, and the Secret Service guys go, hey guys, get off the road. And Lynch, they kind of formed like a perimeter, like a barrier, and Lynch kind of snuck through. And the Secret Service guy kind of led him and said, all right, kid, you can watch. And he said he was 5 or 6 feet away from these cars that were passing. You could see inside the cars. And in the first one was Eisenhower and JFK in the back seat. And they were talking and then this and then that, whatever. They were talking to each other. And then in the second car, it was Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon was just they're just fucking bullshit.
Yeah,
they were not talking. They were not talking to each other at all. They were just looking at opposite sides of the window. So of course we talked earlier about how he was, a rebel because he didn't know what he wanted to do yet. He was smoking cigarettes. He was sort of like Timothy Chalamet and Lady Bird, where they live in a regular boring old suburban town, but he's reading books on capitalism and smoking cigarettes, being what are any of us doing here, man? No, I'm not trying to make fun of David Lynch. I'm just trying to make a comparison.
Bad guy.
Right, but he was I want to be cool,
Yeah.
And he was an Eagle Scout, and he didn't want to do that anymore, but he finished it because his dad wanted him to. And I remember, and I'm glad that he did finish because I remember when I was in high school, I was like, Dad, I want to hang out with my friends, And so I wanted to stop playing baseball. He's like, no, you got to keep playing and stuff. And he really tried to convince me, and I said no. And I stopped playing. And of course, all I did was just play Xbox. I didn't do anything. So, and now I regret I should have played baseball. So, kids, if you're listening, listen to your dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in reading about the stories about him growing up, his sister and all these people, they always say, "Oh yeah, he always had a girlfriend. He loved the ladies even from a very early age." He went in 7th grade. He went on a hayride field trip with his class. And he came back, and apparently he kissed every single girl in his class on the hayride trip. So kids in 7th grade in the 1950s were kind of wild. And obviously, we talked about he was, a rebel and stuff, and he was stealing cars. And there's one story about him and his friend found an apartment door that was open, and they went outside and got these giant big snowballs and just started putting the snowballs on the bed in the apartment. They just trashed they just took so much snow from outside and put it all over the apartment, completely trashed it, and his dad had to pay. But he talked about how his life changed when he was at his girlfriend. He went to his girlfriend's parents' house for whatever gathering, and he met this kid Toby Keeler there, and he goes, yeah, and they start talking about oh, what does your dad do or whatever, and he goes, oh, my dad is an artist.
A
painter, and he said he paints fine art, and he said it was like a bomb that went off in his brain. He's like, holy shit, I can be an artist. And then after that, pretty much the rest of his high school career, he was just I want to be an artist so bad. and he goes, can I go to your father's studio? And he's like, oh, I don't know. He's like, come on, like, just let me go on Monday. I'll go for 5 seconds. Let's go to your father's studio. And he said, yeah. And his father, Bushnell Keeler, who was the painter, ended up being a big influence on him. And even at the end of Room to Dream, he goes, and a big thank you to Bushnell Keeler, which I thought was very interesting. I talked about how he grew to resent that that white picket fence suburban lifestyle that was so great or whatever, because he wanted to live the art life and sort of be like a tortured artist, but his home life was great. Like his parents never fought. He would go home and be like, why don't you guys ever like fucking just yell at each other? Like he'd walk in and be like, oh, Mom, Dad just got this text from Margaret. And she's like, what's a text? And he's like, just, you'll know in 50 years. But towards the end of high school, he talked about how he was sort of exhausted and stressed out because he was essentially living 3 lives. He was trying to live the art life of being an artist and stuff and making art and painting. And also he had joined a high school fraternity as well. And then he had school. And he was so stressed out. He's like 17. And he goes to the doctor and he had an intestinal intestinal spasms from stress. And his doctor goes, oh, yeah, also one of your vertebrae is messed up. You should probably get that checked out. And he goes, nah, I don't think I'm gonna. And then he goes, well, if just take this note, and if you're ever drafted, because Vietnam was like sort of gearing up, he goes, and if you're ever drafted, you can probably just show them this and you'll get out of it. And he actually did get drafted.
Oh, wow.
And he showed them the card and they said, all right, you're what was it? Was it 1F? What was it? 1Y, which means that they only go to you in case of a national emergency.
After high school, Lynch briefly studied at the Corcoran School of the Arts and Design in Washington, D.C., before transferring to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston.
So he talked about how he didn't like Boston because he was like, this is supposed to be a college, and it just feels like another high school art class. Mm-hmm. So him and Jack Fisk was his childhood friend who ended up being his production designer on many, many projects throughout his career. They were like, screw this school, this is bullshit. So what they did is like, we're going to go to Salzburg and I believe Austria. The comments hated us for not knowing where Austria was, or where Vienna was in Austria last time during the Eyes Wide Shut. I'm pretty sure Salzburg is in Austria because they wanted to go study with this Austrian painter named Oscar Kakowska. And so they go there. They go to Europe. And they get to London, and also they made a big deal about it, and they made a big goodbye, like, hey, we're going to be gone for months and months and months. Don't even worry about it. And they go to London, and then they flip a coin. Or no, they went to Salzburg, and the classes didn't start for 3 months. So they're like, well, what do we do? And so they go. David goes, I want to go to Athens, and Jack Fisk goes, I want to go to Portugal. And Jack Fisk is like, why do you want to go to Athens? He goes, well, I know a girl who's going to be there. She's going on vacation or whatever. And so they flip a coin and David Lynch wins. And they go, all right, let's go to Athens. And he goes, and we get to Athens. And after the first night, I woke up and there were 15 lizards on the ceiling. And he goes, and I just thought, what are we doing here? So we went home. After they were gone 15 days.
All it takes is 1 lizard or 15 lizards.
Yeah, that was the reason he gave.
First, short films. After returning from Europe, Lynch fell into a deep depression, frequently got fired from jobs, and slept most of the day. That is until his friend Jack Fisk convinced him to enroll in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts.
So if you're still watching and you're enjoying this episode, please like and subscribe and share with friends. And please give us a good rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts, or give us a bad rating if you don't think we're good. And if you hate watching the podcast, please leave us a hate comment. We always appreciate those. And if you're tuning in post-March 2025, then our feature film, The Documents, has been released. And you can rent or buy it on Amazon. You can own the Blu-ray. And you can watch it through our YouTube membership program. At the time of recording this, we have not made that YouTube membership program. But how it'll most likely work is for a couple bucks a month, you'll have access to the Documents movie and the behind-the-scenes commentary tracks that we made for that movie with the cast and crew, as well as extra commentary tracks for movies that we covered and will cover on the show, and movies that you suggest and want us to cover in the commentary tracks, if that sounds good to you. And if you're watching this episode a year from now and our movie Beach Days is completed and has come out and hasn't been a dumpster fire of a train wreck of a production, and it's a good movie. Hopefully, you can watch that as well. Hopefully, so thank you. When Lynch came back from Europe after 15 days, his parents had moved to California, so he was like, I don't want to go there, and so he was kind of just didn't really have anywhere to be, didn't have anything to do, and he got really depressed. And he was sleeping for like 16 hours a day, they say, and he didn't want to come out of his house, much like when he was at college. And I think he was staying. I think he was staying with Toby Keeler, and Jack Fisk goes, "Hey, you should probably go to the Pennsylvania, the Penn Academy. It's really good there. That's where I'm going." And Lynch is like, "Yeah, sort of considering it." And then Jack Fisk ultimately convinced him to apply. And Lynch didn't know this until a lot later, but Bushnell Keeler, who was like, this kid, we got to do something about him.
Yeah.
Who he called, because he was an artist, he called the Academy and put in a good word like, this David Lynch, he gets it. If he applies, you should hire, or you should enroll him. And Lynch didn't find that out until many years later. And then he, by golly, he got into the he got into the Penn Academy. And he talks about the first time he maybe had the idea of maybe doing, extending his artistry to film, where he goes, I was doing a painting once, and he was, painting some leaves or whatever. It was like in a field, and there was, leaves or whatever. And he goes, I got the sense of a wind blowing and the trees moving, and I got the idea of a moving painting.
Fueled by this revelation, Lynch made a 1-minute animation called 6 Men Getting Sick 6 Times on a $200 budget. I can't believe I nailed that on one.
6 men getting sick 6 times. So he basically got this, I think it was an 8x10 canvas, and then did a plaster mold of his face and Jack Fisk's face twice. So there was 3 faces like sticking out of the plaster mold. And then he had a projector with film in it and animation that he made that would project onto it. And it was like basically just projecting animation onto like a sculpture. So it starts, and there's three faces, and then you see 3 more faces that are animated. And it basically starts out, you see, I thought it was their hearts, but apparently it's their bellies. Their bellies get full with all this, sickness or whatever, and then they ended up throwing up and shit. And it just loops.
Yeah.
Right? So he won, what was the award that he won? He won the Dr. William S. Biddle Cadwallader Memorial Prize.
Okay.
But after he won that, this guy who was also an artist, I believe, his name was Barton Wasserman. He goes up to David Lynch and he goes, "Mr. Lynch, I like this thing so much. I want you to make something like this that I can put up in my house. I'll give you $1,000." And Lynch goes, "Oh, hell yeah, I'll do that for $1,000." So he goes and buys a used camera from like this old doctor who didn't really use it. And he goes, I opened the bag and it looked super pristine and, crystal clear, like it had never been used. And he starts making a similar sort of animation with this camera, and he works on it for 2 months. And after 2 months, he gets the film developed for Barton Wasserman, which is he's making this for. And after 2 months, he gets the film, and he goes back to his apartment, and the light is shooting through the window of the sunlight, and he puts the film up to the light, and it's all like blur. It's like one long streak. And I think it's called like the take-up mechanism. What is it called? The take-up spool was broken. So the film wasn't like stopping to get exposed. It was kind of just running right through it. So it was just this one giant streak of light. It was all nothing. And apparently, according to people around him, they were like, he got super depressed after that. But according to Lynch, he was like, I was super relieved after that. So I don't know which one to believe really. But anyway, so he goes up to Wasserman and he goes, "Listen, I fucked, I screwed up. I spent like $500 of your money making this thing, and it's there's nothing to it." And Barton Wasserman goes, "Don't worry, Lynch, do whatever you want, anything you want, and that's fine by me." And he said, "Okay." So then he ended up making a short film instead.
Using the rest of the funds from Wasserman and some more funds from his father, Lynch made a 4-minute short film called The Alphabet.
So it's like a weird mix of animation and live action, and it's not animation in the way like cartoons, but it starts out. And also, it says it was inspired by Peggy Reevey, who was, I think, his wife at the time. Her niece was saying the alphabet in her sleep once, and she told that to Lynch, and Lynch was like, "Oh, I can make something off of that." and I don't know how he got what the alphabet ended up being
Yeah.
from that, because it's barely like a. But it starts out, there's like this woman who's all like has all this scary makeup on, and she keeps trying to drink coffee, and every time she takes a sip, she's like oh, like and gets crazy and spits it out, which is like just stop drinking the coffee. And then and there's not really animation in it, rather than he does like I don't know how he did it, like whether he split the film and reversed it or he had like a giant mirror on set. He basically did the like what do they call them? Not a gyroscope. When it splits the image and makes it a reflection down the middle, like like on the photo booth thing, like in photo booth.
That's what I was thinking of. It's just like nowadays you can just do that on a photo booth, and David Lynch is doing that. Back then, it's like groundbreaking.
Right. So if your arm, like let's say you stick your arm through the middle of the frame, the way he filmed it, it just looks like two arms sticking out of the center of the frame, that kind of thing. You know, I'll put a picture of it if you're watching and you're like, what the hell are these guys talking about? But also, like I looked at the good thing about watching all this stuff on YouTube, the short films, because that's the only way you can watch them. Really, there's I think they made a DVD just called the Short Films of David Lynch in 2002, which you can get. But like if you don't want to buy that, you can just watch them all on YouTube, and you get to see what other people think about it. So some people be like, "What the fuck was that?" But the one thing he said about he was kind of happy that the camera broke when he was making that one thing for Barton Wasserman. He was happy that it broke because in retrospect, he goes, "If that camera didn't break, I may have never made." I never had a filmmaking career maybe if that thing didn't break. Because if it didn't break, I wouldn't have made the alphabet, which is what got me hooked on making films. I could have just made that weird art stuff. And he sent a letter to the Penn Academy and saying that he was leaving. And he goes, I'm going to make films instead.
After being encouraged by Bushnell Keeler, Lynch applied for a grant from the American Film Institute in Los Angeles and submitted the alphabet and a short script titled The Grandmother.
So, he applied, and then he read, like let's say months later, they had like two groups of winners. They had like the A group and the B group, let's say. And he reads in the paper there's the A group. And he goes, "Oh my God." Like he goes, Peggy, his wife Peggy Reevy, he goes, "There's no way. Like these guys are established underground filmmakers who have like made movies. There's no way I'm going to get one of these things." So he just forgot about it. And then a few weeks later, he gets home, and I think was the guy's name Roger? I think somebody in his house named Roger was like, "Lynch, there's a call for you, buddy." And he goes, "Okay."
Yeah, he was
and
smiling.
he answers the phone, and it was George Stevens Jr. and Antonio Villani. George Stevens Jr. is one of the founders of the American Film Institute. That was started as a government program by Lyndon Johnson, I believe. And George Stevens Jr., his father is George Stevens, who directed movies like Giant and Shane and The Diary of Anne Frank. When I say George Stevens, I'm like just think John Ford, Howard Hawks. But they call and they go, "David, he sent the alphabet, and then he sent the script for The Grandmother in as his application." And George Stevens calls and he goes, "Listen, we love to give you the grant." And he goes, "But we see that the budget for your project, The Grandmother, you said it would be $7,000, $119." And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, we can't really do that. How about 5,000?" And he goes, and me not being an idiot, I said, "Sure, I'll do it for 5,000." And he went out and to the AFI and made the Grandmother. Also at AFI, his class. That the class that was there with him when he got in was Terrence Malick was in there. Do you know who that is?
No.
He did movies like Red Line. There's a documentary that came out a few years ago. I think it's called Thin Blue Line, and I always get that confused with Thin Red Line, which is a Vietnam movie. He also did Badlands, which Sissy Spacek was in, who was also very involved in making Eraserhead because she was married to Jack Fisk, who is David Lynch's childhood friend. And he was also in The Straight Story. She played Alvin Straight's daughter, Rose. She's a great actress. She was also in a movie with Robert Altman called Three Women that I think is good. Where was I getting with that? AFI. So that was Terrence Malick was in his. He did The Tree of Life as well. And also in there was Caleb Deschanel. Does that sound familiar to you?
Zoe Deschanel's.
Yes, he was that's Zoe Deschanel's father. He was a cinematographer. He was the original cinematographer on Titanic.
Yeah. Before
James Cameron fired him. He also did the cinematography for The Natural and a lot of other great movies. He's been nominated for like 6 Oscars. And then who was the other guy? Caleb Deschanel. And Paul Schrader was in that class as well. Paul Schrader wrote Taxi Driver. and the critically acclaimed Cat People. And he also did more recent movies like Master Gardener. What's the one with Oscar Isaac? The Card Counter, and The First Reformed. So yeah, so that was a pretty productive class that AFI got in 1971, probably 1970, and but also he goes, okay, so I'll make The Grandmother for $5,000, which he did. The production budget for it was $5,000. But what happened was him and Alan Splett, who was a sound man who he met at AFI, they were in the whatever booth that had a deal with AFI for the students to use. They still had to pay, but it's like if you're an AFI student, let's say you get a discount or whatever. I don't know exactly the schematics of it, but they were in the studio just recording sounds like like dropping marbles through tubes and shit and recording it and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff for like months. And they didn't know. They thought it was like a one-time fee, get in there or whatever. But then the guy comes up and goes, "You guys were in there for 567 hours, whatever it was. It was something crazy like that." And he goes, "Okay." And he goes, "Well, usually we would just charge $2,000 for that, but if we charge you guys an hourly rate, it's going to be like
You guys are
$15,000. You know?"
Yeah.
And then luckily they got the discounted rate. It was $2,000. So the production budget for the Grandmother ended up being $7,200, which is $81 off of what his original budget pitched in his application for AFI was. And eventually, The Grandmother was completed, and it was released in Europe on TV and won some film festivals, and we got into some film festivals at Atlanta, San Francisco, and Bellevue. And I watched it. And the only way you can watch it, I'm assuming, is if you don't buy the short films by David Lynch DVD. I saw a copy of it by the Brazil Space Program on Facebook. And I don't think they're an actual space program. I think they're like a music group, because what I watched was like, The Grandmother, but they did like a live orchestra thing over it. So I did not hear the original. Like I couldn't find the original audio for free. You know what I mean?
I feel like I watched it on YouTube. Unless I watched some random...
You just watched a random movie called The Grandmother?
It definitely had... I'm pretty sure it was the thing. It's a kid pulling a lady out of this big, weird-looking thing.
Right. So The Grandmother... So the premise of The Grandmother is there's a kid whose parents suck, and so he goes into... All right, I'll just start from the beginning. So the opening, it's an animation of these seeds sprouting out of the ground, and the seed... cuts to live action, and a fully formed man pops out of the ground. And he's like, "What the hell?" And he goes like, "This sucks." And the seeds below him, pull out like a hot girl. And he's like, "Nice." And they start having sex. And then while they're having sex, there's a seed that gets sent all the way over to this other part in the ground. And then the kid is born. And then his life sucked. The dad immediately starts beating the shit out of him, going, "What are you doing here? Come here!" And starts beating the crap out of him. And there's no dialogue, by the way, at least from what I can tell, because I watched a version that was only music because the Brazil Space Program scored it live. And then he's like, "My life sucks." So what he does is he goes and gets a bag of seeds, and he dumps a bunch of dirt on his bed and plants a seed, and that ends up making a grandmother that loves him and stuff.
Okay.
And shit gets crazy.
I think I only saw the scene where he pulls the grandma out, and I was thinking...
Yeah, you probably saw like a clip of it on YouTube.
Yeah,
you can find clips of it, but the whole thing is hard to find.
So that goes for a good amount of... Or a few of his things are kind of inaccessible, hard to find. I mean, Elephant Man isn't streaming anywhere.
Hey, did you end up getting to see that?
Not really. I was able to,
Yeah.
But, Elephant Man, I think... the one with Nicolas Cage isn't really streaming anywhere. You have it though, Wild at Heart, yeah. But anyway, no. Can we go back to the alphabet real quick?
Yeah.
With so Peggy Lynch, I guess. What's her?
Peggy Reevy.
Peggy Reevy. She's credited as Peggy Lynch because they were married at the time. So in that, she's painted all white. That's a common thing that he keeps using later on. Like you see that in Lost Highway.
With the Mystery Man.
Yeah,
Robert Blake.
That's like a common thing. He likes to paint people like stark white. I just figured that his first film, and it carries on throughout a lot of his other things. In 1974, during a pause in filming on Eraserhead, Lynch made a short film titled The Amputee.
So just jumping ahead of really quick so we can cover all the short films he made in this era. So Fred Elms was obviously a cinematographer, and AFI had this project. They're like, hey, we got to test these two types of videotape. Videotape is like sort of new. It's like the 70s, and it's black and white videotape. We got to get you to test it. And he told David Lynch about this. He goes, well, wait, do they care how much, like, how you use it? Like, you think they'll let us do something? He goes, yeah, sure. He goes, what if we just film like a scene and we just film it twice, and one with this film and one with the other film, and then we can make a short film out of it. And he goes, yeah, sure. I don't think they'll have any objections to that. So David Lynch like stays up at night and writes something, and they end up filming, what would be The Amputee, which is it's Catherine Coulson, who would end up working with him on Eraserhead. She was married to Jack Nance, which we'll get to, and she also plays the log lady in Twin Peaks. And so they got her, and I guess she was sitting in a chair. They cut holes in the chair, so she would just put her calves down there, her legs down there, and then they fabricated some bandages to make it look like she was an amputee. And there's two versions you can watch, because obviously they filmed two versions. It's David Lynch dressed as a female nurse. I was like, is that David Lynch? And I saw she had a skirt on, and I'm like, wait, is that a girl? And no, it's David Lynch. What the hell's going on here? And he was just playing a nurse. He had long hair. It's fine. Whatever. Don't even worry about it. So she's writing a letter, and there's a voiceover, and she's just talking about like all these rambling stories about like gossip and interrelationships in her life to whoever. And while she's doing that, in one version, David Lynch is just, is cleaning her wounds and stuff, and it's fine. But then the version that I saw, he starts cleaning her wounds, and they just start bleeding profusely.
Of course,
and
as usual.
Yeah, and then it just ends. So.
During this era of Lynch's life, he also made 3 more short films: Absurd Encounter with Fear, Fictitious Anakin Commercial, Anderson Commercial, and Sailing with Bushnell Keeler.
So these never came up in all the research that I did, which is just curious to me, because they're clearly on his IMDb, and you can find them and watch them on the internet. So Absurd Encounter with Fear stars Jack Fisk and Peggy Reavy, and basically what it is, it starts out it's a wide shot, and this guy who looks like a zombie with a white makeup and everything is like walking towards the camera going, oh, and you're like, oh, and the music is crazy. I don't know if it's the original music, but the violin is going off. It's insane. And he walks towards the camera, and then he walks past the camera, and you're like, oh, he's not coming after me. He's going after this lady. And there's a lady sitting out in the field, and you're like, oh, she's in trouble or whatever. And then he stops behind her, and he undoes his fly, and you're like, oh my God, he's gonna assault her. And then he starts taking like flowers and stuff out. I think I watched it. It was, instead of like 1080p, I watched this thing. It was 40 pixels. Like, I couldn't tell, but it looked like he was taking flowers like out of his fly. Like maybe he was trying to like express that he liked her. And then he like kind of like drops them and fumbles them, and then the camera zooms in on his face, and he sees that we're watching him, and he goes, oh, it gets like kind of humiliated a little bit, and then just fucking dies. just literally passes out and dies. What was the fictitious Aniston commercial? I was looking at your face, and my brain automatically went to asinine. Sorry.
Oh,
so
what the heck?
He made
apparently a block of wood before.
Huh?
You called me a block of wood.
I called you a block of wood today.
That's messed up.
But apparently, when he was at Penn Academy, I think it must have been, he made the fictitious Aniston commercial, which is basically just Advil, and it's about it's a guy in a field, of course, again, and he's like, ow, ooh, my head, oh God, oh geez. And then then an old guy goes, huh? And like shows the box of Aniston. And then the guy starts running in the field like frolicking, being like, oh, I took the drug. It's excellent.
The original Tim Robinson sketch.
Yeah,
it
maybe,
sounds like
yeah.
a Tim Robinson type of.
Yeah.
And then I'm guessing Bushnell Keeler one is just him sailing with.
No, it's actually not. No, I'm kidding. It is. So Sailing with Bushnell Keeler, it's basically, it might have been the same Rolex camera that he filmed Six Men Getting Six with. Damn it! Shit!
Idiot.
If you're watching, just turn this bullshit off. 6 Men Getting Sick six times.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been the same camera he shot that with, but it's basically just a home movie of him and Bushnell and I think Toby Keeler on this boat, like sailboat. And it's weird because it's just a little home movie, and I don't know if somebody put this in later, the music, but the music it's like this haunting like violin, and you're like, why is his whole movie scary? Like this looks like a fun day.
Yeah.
And it's edited all dreamy and stuff. It's like, of course.
I was gonna say you're gonna say yeah, they're just sailing, and then Bushnell Keeler starts bleeding from his eyes.
Yeah, he shoots him in the head.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he's Bushnell Keeler now.
Yeah, he's Bushnell Keeler, and then it switches to another boat, and we never go back to the
they
other
never.
boat.
And this changes protagonist. It pulls a Hitchcock halfway through.
Eraserhead, 1977. After abandoning a feature script titled Garden Back, another story formed in his head, and after a few months, Lynch had a 21-page script for Eraserhead.
So Garden Back was a story about a guy who started growing plants out of his back, which seems very in pattern for Lynch at this point. And apparently, like, bugs and stuff were a big theme of it. It was it sounds like, I haven't read it, but it sounds a lot like it would have been similar to the Fly, some sort of like metamorphosis kind of story. And Frank Daniel, who was from Czechoslovakia, first try, I said Czechoslovakia, first try. We definitely didn't have to retake that because I couldn't say Czechoslovakia the first time. Damn it. So Frank, he was basically his teacher. David Lynch described him as like the best film teacher of all time. And Frank Daniel worked with him a lot while making the script. And Caleb Deschanel, like David Lynch sort of was like, he wrote it and he was like, yeah, I guess it's good. Like his heart wasn't really in it. But Caleb Deschanel took it to Fox Studios, I'm pretty sure. And they read it, and the guy's like, this is pretty good. And whatever producer they got in contact with goes, I'll give you $50,000, I think, to make it, if you make it a feature movie. And they're like, hey, David, like, make it a feature. And he's like, all right, I'll make it a feature. So he had some writing sessions with Gil Dennis and with Frank Daniel. And Lynch just abandoned it because he was like, first of all, I'm not really that into this. And also, another bug movie had come out. And bugs were like apparently a big thing in Garden Back. The bug movie was called The Hellstrom Chronicle.
And that was
has bug movie written all over it.
Yeah.
It was a documentary. It was a fake documentary about bugs taking over, I think.
It's probably just something that at the time he thought was going to be huge. Or something bigger that would overshadow his film.
Yeah, maybe possibly. Sort of like how our movie, The Documents, which is has to do with the world of aliens and UFOs. It's a comedy. Is going to overshadow the UFO movie that Spielberg is also filming in New Jersey as well. I don't know. I hate to break the news to Spielberg, but somebody's got to tell him that it's already been done.
Yeah. Somebody's got to talk to that guy before he just walks in our area thinking he runs the town.
So in 1971, David Lynch left the AFI. American Film Institute, because he was like, his first year he said he was very kind of miserable because he was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like Garden Back, this sucks. I can't make that. Like I don't really know what I want to do. And Frank Daniels goes, like David, okay, yeah. So he left, and then he gets a call. Peggy Reevy's like, David, everybody's calling you from the AFI. He goes, all right. So he answers the phone. Frank Daniels like, David, what's going on? He's like, I don't know what I want to do, man. Like this isn't working out. And Frank Daniel goes, what do you want to do? And he goes, I have the script called Eraserhead. And he goes, how long is it? And he goes, it's 21 pages. And he goes, all right, so a 21-minute movie, we can make that. Let's make it. And he goes, well, I don't know if it might be a little bit more than 21. I don't know. And he goes, all right, fine. It's a 42-minute movie. Like, just fucking come down here and we'll make it. Don't even worry about it. And he goes, okay, fine. And then Frank Daniel is trying to talk to the money men at AFI, being like, hey, I don't know if it was George Stevens. I don't know exactly who it was, but it was a board member at the AFI. And he goes, hey, David wants to make this Eraserhead script. And the guy like read it and goes, like, we don't really have, he said something like, we don't really want to make movies like Eraserhead. We don't make movies like Eraserhead at AFI. And Frank Daniel, as like a sign of solidarity with David, as a gesture, resigned from AFI, thinking it would be like a big moment. And they were like he was like, that's it, I've resigned, sent it in, thinking they'd be like, okay, he cares about this. Obviously we're not going to fight. But they didn't really bat an eye, and we're kind of just like, oh, he left. Okay.
Yeah, well, he's moving on.
Yeah, so he left.
Like, guys.
So he left the AFI. But he still but Eraserhead did end up getting made through AFI. So I think let me see what happened here. So, but Lynch, obviously they ended up making Eraserhead through the AFI. So I think Frank Daniel and Lynch must have come back. I think somebody said, I think Frank Daniel told the board, like, if David Lynch doesn't want to make a movie with us, then we must be doing something wrong. And I think that sort of convinced them. And then they ended up funding Eraserhead. Eraserhead, as a script, was very inspired and influenced by his early domestic life as a father and having a baby like cry all night and stuff like that. Because Lynch did have a very, he was sort of like our friend Mark, where there's always something wrong with him physically. Where he's always like, hey, how you doing, man? He's like, oh, my neck, it's killing me. So he would wake up in the morning, he would feel sick. So he would take like a few hours for him to like wake up and stuff. And if he didn't get enough sleep, that would be even worse. So the baby crying all night didn't make things better. He also had a bad back as well that we talked about, which is why he didn't get drafted to the Vietnam War.
Well, before this was made, he was talking about how he just had a kid, so he kind of was starting to have to like straighten out and get a real job. And he talks about how the night before he got his real job, he was just building like a shelf or something. And as he was working on it, he could feel his freedom being like sucked away from him, knowing that he had to start a new job. So I feel like this fits in because you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, it's
the reason he has to kind of leave his artistic lifestyle behind was because of the kid. So in late 1971, AFI gave Lynch a $10,000 budget to make Eraserhead not as a feature film but as a short film. And in June 1972, filming began and wouldn't be completed until 1976.
So Lynch put together a ragtag team, and I love ragtag teams. If your movie has a ragtag team in it, I don't think it's a bad movie. It's as simple as that. The ragtag team that he had consisted of Jack Fisk, who was the production designer, Doreen Small, who was the production manager, Catherine Coulson, who played the amputee in the movie The Amputee. She was the assistant director. Alan Splett, who we mentioned earlier, who was the guy who did all the sound effects with him on The Grandmother, and they spent like 567 hours in the studio. He was on sound. Another guy, Herb Cardwell, was on camera. He was the cinematographer. And Sissy Spacek, who I mentioned earlier, was also married to she was either dating or married to Jack Fisk at this time, and I think she had already starred in Terrence Malick's breakout movie The Badlands, or just Badlands. So she sort of had some clout in the industry. Maybe she might have been getting jobs and getting work, but she also came and helped out as like an production assistant type thing. She's in the credits as well. She wasn't there consistently. It was just whenever she could, she helped out, which was cool. There was one story, Jack Nance, who played Harry Spencer. There was a scene that was cut out of the movie where Harry Spencer sees a bunch of like bums fighting over a bunch of dimes. And Lynch obviously was kind of poor at the time, so he had all of his money in his bank account he made into dimes for the scene. And so they're filming, and then he goes, all right, good, cut. And because they were short on staff, Jack Nance also played one of the bums. So that it's let's say they cut to a shot of Jack Nance looking, they cut to another shot and he's there, but it's not supposed to be him. He's just playing a bum.
His hair is covered up.
Yeah, they put up the world's biggest hat on him to cover up his Eraserhead hair.
He's wearing an Abe Lincoln hat.
he's just wearing a top hat. He's just wearing a magician's hat. So Catherine Coulson comes up to David. David goes, all right, cut and good. That was a good job, guys, with the dimes. That was good. Catherine Coulson, who's Jack Nance's wife, comes up to David and goes, hey, Jack is taking he's shoving the dimes in his pocket. and he goes, God, and also Jack Nance is hammered. Like they're filming, he's just drunk.
Oh, was he the whole time?
Not the whole time, but in this particular instance. Also, Jack Nance is the best. Every story I hear about him, like he's, so David goes up to Jack Nance and goes, listen, buddy. He goes, I want my dimes back. And he goes, yeah, Lynch, you want it all, don't ya? and Lynch, and even though you're like, oh, that's funny, in Lynch's mind, because I guess he got self-conscious about it. He goes, oh yeah, I really want to compensate these people properly. And in that moment, he came up with the idea of giving everybody a percentage on the movie, which he did. They later wrote the contracts out, and people were still getting money from the movie years and years later, which was very smart on. So, but Jack Nance found out later. He found out later that night that Catherine tattletaled on him. And I forget, I think they were leaving or something. I had to go somewhere. And Catherine Coulson's like, all right, Jack Nance, she calls him Jack Nance, even though he's the husband.
Come on, Jack Nance.
She goes, come on, Jack, let's go home. And he goes, get in the car, horse face. And she punches him in the face, and she had a ring on and punched him and cut his nose and stuff.
That's funny to think about, like him getting punched in the face with the hair.
Yeah.
So it would be like his face and the hair.
His head goes back a foot, and 10 seconds later, his hair follows him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't know. So in the movie, when the lady in the radiator is dancing, and she's like, "In heaven, everything is fine." She's like, "There's like things dropping." I think it's from that scene, or maybe later when his head rolls off. But they're in the radiator, and like you see like these little, like slimy guys, these slimy tubes go on the ground. I'm like, what the fuck is those? Because it's black and white, I can't really tell. Those were umbilical cords. They're supposed to be, right?
Okay.
But the problem is they actually are umbilical cords. So I think Doreen Small or somebody, whoever was, it might have been David Lynch and Doreen Small. They went to like a local hospital and were like, hey, we're making a movie. Can we just have the umbilical cords? And they're like, I don't know. What are you going to do with them? Like, they're just going to be in jars in the background. Don't even fucking worry about it. Shut up. And they were like, all right, fine. And they gave him the umbilical cords and then, of course, just dropped them onto the floor. And she was like stepping on them and shit.
Yeah.
Gross. See, there was a lot of like, I don't want, what's the word? Not gore, but there was a lot of instances of them using real things.
Yeah,
like there was one scene that was cut out of like Harry Spencer's walking around. I'm gonna feel so dumb if his name's actually Henry. Henry, who cares? So he's walking around. It's when he was going to his girl. I think it was Mary's house, the girl, and he's walking and like there's dogs barking, like people yelling at him, and he sees like a dead cat in one scene. He just went to a vet and was like, "Can I have a dead cat?" And they were like, "Sure."
Yeah, they're just like, "Oh yeah, you're like the fourth guy today to ask."
But I think but I think he embalmed it or like did some kind of thing like that because the cat was there like 5 years later. Like they never picked it up.
Yeah. There's an interview where they're walking through and he's like, "This is where the dead cat was."
Oh yeah, I saw that same thing. Because that's where we keep the cat. But also Doreen, there was a scene. David goes, "Hey, Doreen, I'm gonna need a dog and like 6 little puppies to like suckle on her on the milk." Or whatever. And she's like, oh, okay, David, like whatever. So she just went to a vet and was like, do you guys have any dogs that we can borrow? I don't understand giving a bunch of kids in the 70s, like unless there was a person who was there, if they didn't pay. Like I can't imagine being a vet and then me and you walk in there, seeing me and you walk in there and going, hey, can we like borrow a dog?
Some dogs.
It's like, no, dude.
Yeah,
Anyway, the baby, the mutant baby, right? I see that and I'm like, that's one of the most impressive effects of all time. Like how do they do that? That thing looks so, not that it looks like it looks fleshy and real and the eyes are moving and obviously you can tell it's kind of moving, but it's like how are they making that? And I never, nobody knows.
It's just David Lynch, I feel like.
Well, David Lynch has specifically not told anybody how they did it.
Yeah, okay.
And there are some rumors that it might have been an embalmed cow fetus.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense because that's why the head looks like Mr. Krabs' daughter.
It does, yeah.
It does. I just came up with
name?
that. Pearl. Yeah.
It's all about you, Pearl.
On your 16th birthday. The 45 to 55-year-olds will not get that one.
Yeah.
That's most of our audience, by the way. So after a year or two of shooting, the AFI they ran out of money that AFI gave them, right? And they go, hey, listen, we got to pull out. You can still use, like, you can borrow the equipment, but we cannot give you more money. So that basically made the production very sporadic and starty and stoppy for years because they can only film when David Lynch had the money. And then eventually AFI had to cut themselves off completely from the movie because we're talking early 70s, right? And in 1969, a movie called Easy Rider came out, and it was like one of the highest it might have been the highest grossing movie. Nah, it couldn't have made more than Butch Cassidy. It was one of the highest grossing movies of 1969, but then studios found out that the budget for that movie was like $250,000, something like that, right? Which is very, very low budget for the time. And because that was before like a low budget was a thing. Because you needed a $200,000 camera, let's say. Now we just have $1,000 camera, you can film something. But then the studios found out how much they spent on it and go, wait a minute, if they can make a movie that competes with our movie for that much money, they're doing that at AFI right now. So why are we giving money? Because the studios had some kind of reciprocal agreement where the studios would like sort of subsidize the AFI and help fund some of their movies so they can get filmmakers back. And they go, wait, we're not going to film the AFI. They're just going to make movies that are going to compete with our movies. So they made a thing at AFI. They said, no more. You're not allowed to make feature films anymore. And now that Eraserhead was a feature film,
Yeah, they had to just completely cut it off.
right? So that's at the end of the movie. It says made in association with AFI, which is their way of AFI, because they still wanted the movie to succeed, but like legally, that's how they got around. Like, oh, well, we didn't fund it once it became a feature, to like just appease the studios and stuff like that. Also during this period, his domestic life with Peggy Reeve started to unravel. She started to talk how she felt like she sort of felt like an outsider in his life, and she would call because I think she was not living in California, I believe, or she might have stopped in a few times, but they were, I think they might have had a long distance thing going on, her and David Lynch, and she would be on the phone with like her sister or whatever, and she'd be like, they're all like there's these girls that are just helping out and stuff, like they're all in love with him, right? And Peggy Reeve kind of is like naively going, oh well, not yeah, he's a nice boy.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I don't know if he explicitly like cheated on her a lot, but there is a pattern in his life that we'll talk about a little bit because not too much because it's still sort of like a privacy thing. Of he would always like change girlfriends or wives during productions, sort of. And we'll get to that later. So he divorced Peggy, and no funding. He's sleeping on the set. He's divorced. He has no money.
Living in the stable.
Yeah, living at AFI. He's not supposed to be sleeping in there.
Can we talk about the AFI building?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So do you know about it at all?
I don't know what you know.
He was talking about it, how the building that he basically lived in was just a huge mansion, like a 50-room mansion on top of a hill. And he had this whole mansion that he could have stayed in, and he found the stables like down on the ground level, and he basically turned that into his own studio, like sound stage, everything, and he lived there. That's why I think the documentary, The Art Life, he's talking about how he went there, and he's still, I know like context wise, he's still married to Peggy, and he's just talking about, I'm just living there, I'm living in the stables, working, hanging out with all the people. And I'm like, he has a kid and a wife.
yeah, that's right. He had a kid. I forgot about that.
And then the next scene, at like the next part after that, he's like, so Peg and I got divorced. And I'm like, obviously, he's just living in a stable, and he has, he doesn't mention her at all at this point in his life. So I'm like, I'm just assuming that they didn't work out. And then the next scene, he talks about it.
I think he was sleeping like on the set for about 8 months. Also, Doreen Small was also sleeping. Nobody really talks about that because like it's more of a big story. Like David Lynch was sleeping there, but Doreen Small was also sleeping there as well because she had like a 2 or 3 hour, like she had a long commute to the thing. So she was like, I'll just fucking sleep here. I don't care.
Yeah.
So to make ends meet when they were filming, because they were filming nights, and to make ends meet, he got a paper route job. But the problem is that when they were the only time they could film, which was at night, he had a paper route to go do. So what he would do is he would leave. They'd be filming, and then he'd go, "Hey, all right, guys, get this next scene, set up. I'm gonna go do the paper route." And he would leave for like an hour or two, and he would get all the papers. And he had a system down where he needed both windows open. And he would just go down the streets throwing he got his paper route down to like an hour flat. That he says, and he would come back and they would film. But then at a certain point, the boss goes, "Yeah, listen, they changed it, so it's like more of like the subscriptions are different. So like some people get New York Times, some people get this. So you have to look at the name and see which one they have and throw it out." He's like, "Are you kidding me? That'll take me hours. Like I got a whole thing down." And they were like, "Do it," and he was like, "No," and they're like, "You're gonna do it. Just get out of here." And then for like 3 days he didn't do it, and people complained, and then they fired him.
Yeah, and just nobody got there.
Yeah. Also, he's getting like 5 cents a week, whatever bullshit it was. I think it was like maybe $41 a week, which is insane now. What else? So finally, in 1976, the movie is partially finished. I think it's like an hour and 50 minutes at this point, and they go, "Hey, you should submit it to Cannes." And he goes, "Okay, I'll submit it to Cannes or Cannes, however." No, he said, "You should submit it to Cannes." He goes, "How do you pronounce that?" And they said, "I don't know." And he goes,
"Comment below how you
yeah, comment.
Yeah, just
send us an audio recording of you saying it." So it was rejected by Cannes and the New York Film Festival, right? But he talks about one of the interesting stories that I thought was funny is he had I think 12 canisters in total. There were 6 film reel canisters for the film and then 6 for the audio. So there was 12 in total, and he went on a plane to New York to go screen it for Cannes consideration. And he goes there and he's like, I need something to like carry all these things in. He didn't have anything. And so he goes to a farmer's market and he sees the shopping carts and he goes, oh, maybe I'll use that. And he goes inside and he goes, can I talk to a manager of the farmer's market? And they go, yeah, he's over there. And he goes, hey man, listen, I'm submitting my film to the festival. Can I just take one of your carts? Just to carry my stuff there. I'll bring it back, I swear. And the manager starts just fucking crying, like, and he goes, thank you, because people would just steal them. So the fact that David Lynch went in there, I was like, hey man, you mind if I ask? He's like, you could have 7. Just bring of course. So I thought that was a funny story. But he goes to the screening or to the theater and he gives the stuff to the projectionist and he goes, hey, all right, here, play it. And he goes, well, you got like 5 movies ahead of you. And he goes, it's 2:00. I got 5 movies ahead of me. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, all right. And so he just, walks around town just drinking coffee. And then a few hours later, he comes back. And the guy goes, hey, we're going to put your movie on. And he goes, all right. And he goes, he was too nervous to go in there. He said he was nervous showing people earlier. He goes, all right, I didn't want to go in. So I just listened outside the door. And for an hour and 50 minutes, he was just like, oh my God, sweating or whatever. He hears the movie end and he just gets the hell out of there. He doesn't want to hear anything. And of course, they rejected it. And then years later, he found out that his Eraserhead was playing to a completely empty theater. Nobody was in there, which is like sort of like I guess some kind of metaphor for like they had greatness in their hands, but it fell on deaf ears, like that kind of thing, where they had Eraserhead, and nobody took the time to watch it. You'd be surprised how many festivals these days don't watch their.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because I used to think, of course they do. Because when you submit to screenplay competitions, like they do definitely read it. But anyway.
I mean, not to get too far into that, but I feel like if they make you pay to submit it and then they don't watch it, that's a whole
insane.
different story.
That's like, fuck them.
Keep that in. Keep it in. Fuck them. Please just keep that in. That's so
funny. Comment below if you want us to keep that in.
Yeah, comment below if you said fuck them to the film festivals.
Shit. So it didn't get into Cannes or New York Film Festival. The only festival that I got into, or the first one that it got into, was the FilmX Film Festival, which was in Los Angeles. And this is also the hour and 50-minute version. This is before he trimmed it. So he goes to the screening like the night before, let's say, or it was right before the movie was about to go on, and he's talking with the projectionist, and there's like a soundboard in the booth and stuff like that. And he goes, "All right, David, every time you press this button, the sound goes up 1 decibel." And he goes, "All right, cool." And then the guy leaves, and he goes, "So just press it however much. Like we're gonna play it, and then you just press it and see how much you want it, and then just leave, and then it'll play again." And he goes, "Okay." So the guy leaves, and he presses it. And he goes, "That's pretty good. Well, let me just make sure they can hear it." And he presses it like 4 more times. And then he goes, "So I pressed it 3 more times. Then before I left, I pressed it 4 more times just for good measure." and then he leaves. Again, doesn't watch the screening or whatever. And then he goes, "I later heard that it was hurting everybody's ears. Like she puts a plate on the table and it was like people were getting stabbed in the ears. Everybody hated it." And they got some mixed reactions out of that screening. There was one. There was a nasty review in Variety, and he was like, the reactions to it weren't the best. Like some of them are probably good, right? But what he did learn from that screening, he's like, I got to cut this thing because people who worked on the movie screened it, and they were like, David, that thing was tough to get through. That was a slog. It's we has to get through faster. So David cut 20 minutes out of it, which is how we got the hour and 29-minute version that we all know, and some of us love, and some of us don't know how they feel about it, and some of us probably, like my mom, my mom hates it.
Yeah. I can't believe you watched that with your mom.
I watched it. The first time I watched it was a few years ago. I watched all of David Lynch's stuff except for Inland Empire and Twin Peaks. And I was like, all right, you guys want to watch David Lynch's movies? And they're like, sure, because I've been doing that. Like we did Spielberg, Scorsese. And they're like, sure, David Lynch, cool, why not? And then the first one was Eraserhead. And my mom's like, "What the fuck?
What are you making me
Bullshit."
watch,
My mom hated
Johnny?
it.
You're concerning me.
Johnny, you're scaring me. Also, yeah. Lynch didn't want his parents to see it because he was like, "Don't see this movie," because he knew that they wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, "Where did this come from?" That kind of thing.
Well, that's again. Sorry to jump around a little bit, but that's again because he's talking about earlier when he's with Peggy Lynch and they had an
Peggy
apartment. Whatever her name is. They had an apartment, but in the apartment there was like a basement ground floor, and he had like little experiments like dead birds and stuff. And he said he showed his dad, and he's like, I was just so happy to share this thing with my dad. And I had a smile on my face, and I'm walking up the stairs, and I turn around, and I see this paining look on my dad's face. And I kind of understood. And then his dad literally was like, David, I don't think you should have kids.
Yeah. Well, he would do that. He would dissect animals with his son. They'd get like a chicken or something and just dissect it.
Oh, but in this story, the dad is like concerned at what he saw in the basement.
Yeah.
I guess it was like weird because it was probably mixed in with his art, and he's probably painting on the shit. Like, you know.
Oh, but I was saying like he's saying like you shouldn't have kids. And then Lynch later would do that with his kid.
Okay. He did it. I thought you were saying like his dad did it. But yeah.
That kind of reminds me, not that I'm comparing myself to David Lynch, but I remember when I was younger, I used to draw like these action scenes with like stick figures. And in retrospect, I was like, this is so cool I was drawing it. In retrospect, they're horribly violent. And I showed them to my parents, like, this is cool, right? And they were all like, yeah, like they're like, Jesus fucking Christ.
You probably left the room and your mom was like,
they were genuinely concerned. They were genuinely like, I
saw some of the photos, or I saw some of the images. It's like
they're pretty bad.
Like a guy getting dropped from a thing and getting split in half by another.
Yeah, there's
thing.
there's like a wall, and he gets like he lands on it like a skateboarder lands on like a rail.
Yeah, but
he just splits him down the middle. Hot dog style, like Charlie Sheen's wife in Scary Movie 4.
On February 3rd, 1978, Eraserhead began its initial run as a midnight feature in Los Angeles for a year and continued to play in cities through the country for as long as 1981. Over the years, it has theatrically grossed $7 million off a $100,000 budget.
So the $7 million, like, I don't know how much of that was like the 70s and how much of that is now, but it's still impressive that it was playing for a long time. Like when Elephant Man was coming out, he was doing promo interviews for Elephant Man, and the interviewers were going, and as I understand, your first film, Eraserhead, is still playing here in New York City. And he's like, yeah, well, what can I say? But I can go forever like, oh, people thought this, some people thought this. There's some great videos you can watch after you watch this entire podcast. Don't click off of this. Where there's people like, that was crazy. Like I think the director's probably insane, like that kind of thing. But the best reaction I heard from it is, I think probably a famous story, but David Lynch was doing pre-production in London for The Elephant Man, and Jonathan Sanger was a producer on that. And these guys from Lucasfilm visited Sanger and Lynch, and I guess they were, just having dinner, let's say, or something like that. And they go, David, we got a story for you. And he goes, oh yeah. And they go, last night we were at Elstree Studios, either Elstree or Pinewood. I believe Elstree is where Kubrick shot The Shining, but I thought it was Pinewood. It might be Pinewood. They're like, yeah, they were on the set of The Shining last night, and we're talking to Stanley Kubrick, and Kubrick goes, hey, you guys want to come come to my house? We'll have a dinner and a movie. He used to invite people over like that. You know Stanley Kubrick, right?
Oh yeah. I think I've talked about him once or twice.
He used to have people. He loved having people over. So they go, yeah, sure, we'll watch a movie. And they go, what are we gonna watch? And he goes, we're gonna watch my favorite movie, Eraserhead.
Wow.
So Stanley Kubrick loved Eraserhead, and David Lynch was just like, holy shit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was probably the best reaction the best story I've heard is in terms of the reaction. Also, but there's another story going around that he met Stanley Kubrick. And Stanley Kubrick was like, you made my favorite movie, Eraserhead. Lynch never met Kubrick. That was the closest exposure he had to Kubrick. But also, Stanley Kubrick apparently, I don't know if he ever said this publicly, but apparently Eraserhead did have a big influence on The Shining. Which makes sense because Kubrick was like, I want to freak people out.
Yeah.
Which is like, I guess Eraserhead is sort of the blueprint to do that. Would you like to talk about our overall thoughts?
Sure.
Thank God. I don't know what I was going to do if you said no. This movie isn't like, as I understand people like my mom likes, what was that movie that came out with the hot snowman, the Hot Frosty or something like that?
Yeah,
or she likes movies like that, but she also, But so she sees Eraserhead and she's like, I don't know what the fuck's
Yeah,
going on.
yeah.
So obviously it's all about the audience who's watching it. And I can understand both sides of why they love it, why they don't like it. But with Eraserhead, it's not so much you're trying to, and this might be obvious, but it's not so much that it's trying to tell you a story. It's just trying to make you feel a certain anxiety.
Yeah.
Where in terms of like people say like, oh, Lynch's movies are impenetrable. I think Eraserhead probably has the least amount of plot out of all of David Lynch's movies, where it's just trying to convey a mood and an emotion. It's not really concerned with, showing you character or character change. It's trying to make you just feel a certain thing. And I remember the one thing I remember my dad was when I watched it with my parents for the first time. My dad goes, he goes, the sound in that was amazing. And I was like, yeah, you're right, because the ambient sounds he has in this is like, because obviously we said earlier how David Lynch did the sound design of all of his movies, and he was very sound oriented while making these things. And you look, and I don't know where he got this from, because it pops up a lot in his filmography. Is like this, the machines of industry like churning outside of wherever these people are living. It's almost like he's basically living. You don't really see the sky. It's almost like he's totally encompassed by this mechanical machine industry world, because he's living in an industrial part of the world. So when he goes out, he's not seeing like, stores on the street. He's just seeing like clumps of dirt and train tracks and just boom, chomp, chomp, chomp. Just, and that shows up again in Elephant Man, and also Straight Story, which we'll talk about, and also Blue Velvet. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I think that also works. But the main thing for me that I noticed, because where because I just don't want to say the obvious stuff where it's like, oh, but the thing that really stuck out to me when I'm watching it this time is that I think, and this might just be me looking into it too much, but there's sort of like a conflicting thing that it does, where it's suggesting all of this outside exterior stuff going on by showing you all the the blasting all these background ambient sounds in your ear, but also visually it doesn't convey that there's an outside world at all when he's in his apartment. Like when he's in an apartment, there's no light shining through. It's almost like he's in like this room that's just in this black void, and you're seeing like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm just kind of floating through space, sort of like in the beginning. But then you hear that there's stuff going out there, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And it might be like a subconscious thing, like the same way that in The Shining, a lot of I use The Shining as a proxy to sort of understand this movie in a certain sense, or like how it works, the mechanics of it, how it works. But like in The Shining, where like the carpet changes direction, the pattern on the carpet changes direction, or like fire alarms just like and chairs just move in between cuts, and how that subconsciously sort of makes you uneasy. There's a lot of stuff like that going on in this, with that I believe as well. What else do I got here? What do you think? What do you think about that? Am I rambling here, or does that
No,
that
no,
makes
it makes
sense?
sense. I mean that's where we get into the discussion more of where people who don't like it because they don't know what's going on, where it's not really about what's going on. It's about like what's going on in terms of how it's trying to make you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does such a good job at that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, in my opinion, it made me feel the way I think it wanted you to make you feel, like just super uneasy. And I don't know.
Like,
I
what do
feel
you
like,
think? What do you think the inner turmoil about Harry Spencer's character was?
well, that's where it's people that this is kind of like a basic thing to say, where it reflects what's going on in David Lynch's life about having a kid and feeling like tied down by that. But I think there was an interview where they asked him like, "Oh, is this you?" And he's like, "Nah, I sympathize with him, but that character is not supposed to be me, even though it comes off that way." But I do get the sense that it could be like, I don't know, because this is where we can get into the whole dream discussion, where to me this movie does feel like very dreamy, like the whole time, kind of. And it feels like it could just be like a terrible, terrible dream about what would happen if he did have a kid. And he's like a business guy wanting to get out in the world, and he's like at that age where he wants to explore, but he kind of ends up having to like do the right thing and help this woman take care of the child.
Right. I think the dream thing is something that literally probably comes up in discussion when talking about any David Lynch movie.
Yeah, that's why it's like I don't know how much I want to bring it up even.
Right.
You know.
You know, if I feel like I'm struggling to communicate my thoughts to this movie, I kind of am. But the one thing that I can say that really pinpoints it is this, and this is gonna sound dumb, but stick with me here. This is like sort of like Courage the Cowardly Dog for adults.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
How do you like that?
I like that a lot, actually.
If you're not familiar with Courage the Cowardly Dog, it's a kids show where it's the world seen through the eyes of like an anxious
Scared
dog.
Yeah.
So like a mailman could just be, you know, a guy who has spaghetti arms and it's like a
Return the
ghost going,
slab.
"Return the slab."
Mhm.
It's absolutely horrifying. That, and I when I watch Eraserhead, it makes me feel the same way that Courage the Cowardly Dog made me feel as a kid. I used to watch that show and just get freaked the fuck out, and I'm like, why am I watching this?
Yeah. Why is this on a kid's?
The same thing with the Eraserhead. It's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Doing this to myself again?
But
You
another thing with Eraserhead where it's like, first of all, I really do like the Courage the Cowardly Dog comparison. That makes a lot of sense. It feels like even if they aren't like even if like Courage the Cowardly Dog isn't directly inspired by David Lynch stuff, they're pulling from the same place. You know what I'm saying? But
One thing, if you go like 6 to 8 minutes in this movie where Harry's walking home after wherever he is, it's after that, you know, after that giant infinite space opening, where it looks like he's sort of like born, like that the umbilical cord comes out of his mouth, whatever. I did realize, like, oh, he has his silhouette has an iconography to it, the same way that like Charlie Chaplin's The Tramp does, where like just by their walk and the hat or what's on their head, the hair, you can just recognize Harry from that. And to have something like that in Lynch's first movie is very valuable. To have something that looks iconographic as that is very impressive to me.
The Elephant Man, 1980. After the success of Eraserhead, Lynch had written a script titled Ronnie Rocket that he failed to get made. Lynch was broke and down on his luck, and he got a call from a producer named Stuart Kornfeld.
So Lynch talks about how he goes, the only meeting I got, because Eraserhead did have a substantial amount of success for him, and he goes, the only meeting with like a producer or a money man or executive that that Eraserhead got me is I went in and to this meeting, and the guy goes, all right, what do you got? And I said, well, I have this thing called Ronnie Rocket. And he goes, okay, what's that about? And he goes, well, Ronnie Rocket, he's 3 feet tall. He wears a red pompadour, and he runs on alternating current electricity. And he says, and he politely asked me to leave his office. And Ronnie Rocket is a movie that he desperately tried to get made. After every single movie that he made, he would always go like, let's try Ronnie Rocket, and everybody would be like, no.
Ronnie Rocket, baby.
Yeah. But Kornfeld called, like you said, he called Lynch, and he goes, I love Eraserhead. You're a fucking genius. I don't know why he said it like David Lynch in my head, but he said that. And David Lynch was like, all right, I'm gonna like this guy. And he was like, what do you got? And he goes, well, I have Ronnie Rocket. You want to make that, Stuart Kornfeld? And he goes, yeah, sure. I love it. Let's go to try to make it. And even Kornfeld, he still couldn't get it done. He was like, this isn't impossible. But also, that movie would have been, because it has like in the script, it has like, you know, like robot chickens like doing backflips and shit. It's like there would be no way to do this without some kind of CGI and not have it look crazy. There was some crazy. That was an insane script, and there was some crazy imagery in that. I mentioned Jack Fisk, his sister Mary Fisk. Around this time, I think probably around the end of Eraserhead, was sort of starting to get close with Lynch, and they eventually got married. And so he was married to Jack Fisk's sister. And during this time, he couldn't get Ronnie Rocket made. He didn't have another job coming up. I don't think he was either working odd jobs or not working at all. And the future wasn't looking bright. And Mary Fisk's parents sat her down and they're like, listen, this David Lynch guy, he's a loser. He's not going anywhere. You better like kick him into gear and get him straight, or you should just leave him. And, you know, Lynch found out about this. So he was like, well, shit, I better find a job. So he went to Stuart and he goes, hey, Stuart, do you have any scripts that, you know, like maybe I can direct that are already written? And he goes, I have 4. Let's have a meeting and I'll show them to you. And he goes, okay. And he goes, the first script I got is called Elephant Man. He goes, I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he goes, don't you want to read the other ones first? And he goes, nope.
He didn't.
He said,
even-
I pick number 3.
Yeah, he just liked that one.
Yeah, if you understood that reference, then you're a fan of the Simpsons movie.
No, I didn't get it.
There's a scene in the Simpsons movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger is the president, and he goes, if there's ever something's going on, and his advisor is like, we have 4 plans to figure out the situation. Which one do you pick? So number 1, and he goes, I pick number 3. He goes, don't you want to read them first? He goes, I was elected to lead, not read. Number 3.
Lynch was now attached as director of the project, along with writers Christopher DeVore and Eric Bergen, and producers Stuart Kornfeld and Jonathan Sanger. And the script ended up in the hands of actress Anne Bancroft, who loved it.
So Anne Bancroft might be my favorite actress. She's the best. She's in movies like The Miracle Worker, The Graduate. She was in a movie with Marilyn Monroe, I believe, called Don't Bother to Knock. She was in a Sidney Lumet movie that I watched called Garbo Talks, and it's about she plays this guy's mom who's dying, and she's like, I would like to meet Greta Garbo just once in my life. And the whole point of the movie is that Greta Garbo shows up, right? Greta Garbo's an actress from like the 30s. And in the movie, he's like, you got to come meet my mom. And he's trying to convince her. And at the end, Greta Garbo shows up and goes, hey, I'm here. But they didn't get her. Oh. Like, they didn't get the actress. She said no. So it's like, what's the fucking point of the movie?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I like her. She was also married to Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks directed Blazing Saddles, The 12 Chairs, The Producers, Spaceballs, History of the World Part 1, of which they never made a Part 2 on purpose. Silent Movie, which is a great... There's a bit in Silent Movie where this guy's his fingers are stuck like twisted together, and whenever he shakes somebody's hand, like shake my hand, then the other guy gets it.
Oh, that's...
and the guy goes. That's a great movie. So Mel Brooks, who is known for comedies like Blazing Saddles at this point, he started a new production company called Brooks Films, which is like we're going to do serious movies and stuff. So Mel Brooks gets the list of okay, Christopher DeVore, Eric Bergen, Stuart Corn, I know him, Jonathan Sanger, yeah. Who's this David Lynch guy? And he was like, I want Alan Parker. Alan Parker directed Midnight Express at this point, and he goes, I want Alan Parker. Who's this David Lynch? So they go, all right, well, he made this movie Eraserhead, and he goes, all right, let me watch it. And then they call David, and they're like, hey, David, Mel's he's gonna watch the Eraserhead to see if you're a good fit for the movie, and David Lynch goes, and I told those guys, I said, well, it was nice knowing you. Because he figured once he watches this movie, there's like the jig is up, pal. There's no way you're going to direct it. So he's like, whatever studio they were at or theater where Mel Brooks watched it, Lynch is like just smoke, like, pacing and smoking outside. And Mel Brooks comes out of the movie theater and goes, you're a madman. I love it. This is excellent. You're going to direct the movie. Also, Mel Brooks, before he met David Lynch, I think he heard about Eraserhead. I don't think he saw it yet. But from what he heard about it, he was like, all right, obviously this isn't like an insanely intense movie and it's weird. He was expecting David Lynch to be like this dumb, short, like fat German guy with like spit coming off his lip, like, yeah. But he was just like the sweetest guy ever. Because you see Eraserhead and you're like, there's no way because you see that and you go, who must have made that? Because also this is the 70s. There was nothing. It was like, let's say movies were in this cloud of consciousness over here. And I imagine watching that. I'm sure there was other movies like it, but I'm sure imagining like, seeing a mainstream audience watching Eraserhead for the first time is like a completely other hemisphere of the brain that hadn't been used. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
One other thing that helped get the movie made, because Mel Brooks, once he was on the movie, it was much easier to get it made. Also, we forgot to mention here that Mel Brooks took his name off the marketing of the movie because he didn't want people to think that they were going to see a comedy or something. But they said Pauline Kael, who was most known as a movie critic, who did not like 2001 when it came out, and I remember she liked McCabe and Mrs. Miller. She went on the Dick Cavett show and talked about it, I believe, how she loved McCabe and Mrs. Miller. She was working at Paramount or just doing some stuff for Paramount. She was like reading scripts. She was like supervising whatever, or, she was a consultant, let's say, for scripts. And she read all these scripts. And then when she left Paramount, she said, if you make anything, you should make Elephant Man. And that apparently helped get the movie made as well. So shout out to Pauline Kael. Kael.
On October 13th, 1979, filming began in London with Anthony Hopkins, John Hurt, John Gielgud, and Anne Bancroft in the main cast.
So originally, Lynch told Mel, was like, hey, who's going to do the makeup for the, for the suit for the Elephant Man? And David Lynch goes, I'm going to do it. And he goes, oh, all right, geez, fuck. All right. Like, you know it's going to be, hard. Like, you're going to be very, very busy. Are you sure you can do it? And Lynch is like, yeah, I got it. Don't even worry about it. And he goes, okay. And then a month later, they're getting like kind of close to shooting. And Lynch is working on it. And he said he had a sense of deja vu, but it wasn't deja vu in the past. It was a deja vu in the future. And he had a vision of like, this is not going to work. I don't know, this, like, this is not going to, he went out and told everybody, like, who was, like, whoever he was with, Mary Fisk, hey, David, how's the work going? He's like, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And then however many weeks later, when he, finalized his part of the makeup or whatever, John Hurt shows up and does a test for it. And they try to put it on John Hurt and see if they can make it work. And it wasn't working. And John Hurt, in like, I guess a very considerate way, just went, a valiant effort.
A valiant effort. And
which is super, like, a kind of a class move by him, because I would have been like, oh, that sucks. But also Lynch, when he realized that it wasn't going to work, he said he had nightmares for 4 days of just like, it's not, his life is ruined. He's going to get fired off the movie. He said it was similar to the 4 dark days after JFK got killed. It was like, oh my God, this isn't going to work. And he was just toiling and, like, getting so anxious and getting paranoid about his conversation with Mel, because Mel was like, oh, the makeup's not all right, I'll come over to London, I'll fly over there. And David, like, this guy's gonna be so pissed, he's gonna fire me off the goddamn movie. And Mel Brooks comes up, he goes like, Mel, I'm sorry. He's like, don't worry about it, it's all fine, we got it, don't worry about it. He goes, what are we gonna do? He goes, we're gonna get Christopher Tucker to come do the makeup, who's a very experienced makeup guy. And they said that Christopher Tucker, he did the all the makeup and the prosthetics for the suit for Elephant Man. They said that he did 6 months of work in 6 weeks to get this thing rolling. While they were shooting, they still didn't have it complete because they were very close to shooting. They decided, okay, well, we don't have this, like, the makeup yet ready, like, perfected. So what we'll do is we'll just put a lot of the scenes when John Merrick is in his, his getup, his disguise, where the sack over his head with the one hole and the big trench coat. We'll just film those in the beginning more, so it gives us more time to.
That's smart.
Yeah. There was David Lynch, but also David Lynch is very intimidated because it was sort of like this is his second movie, his first real movie, in a sense, in terms of like an actual production. And he's working with like Sir John Gielgud.
Yeah.
And you're
Sir
like,
John Gielgud.
And he's working with future Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Well, Anthony Hopkins already at that point was pretty well known, right?
Yeah, he was a pretty seasoned actor, I think. So we'll get to Anthony Hopkins. So the actress, what's her name? Her name is Wendy Hiller. She played Miss Mothershead, the main nurse. So David's like kind of like, okay, I think I'm getting the hang of this. First day on set, like I got, it calms his nerves. And all this woman who's like 5 foot tall grabs him on the back of the neck. He said a vice grip, grabs him on the back of the neck, and she goes, "You, Mr. Lynch, I don't know you. I'm gonna be watching you."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Okay, sorry." She's like, "Give me some lunch money." He goes, "Sure." Yeah. She punched him in the belly. No, she didn't do that. But I thought it was very funny. But also, he was so self-conscious. He goes, every day on Elephant Man, I was like so anxious and so scared because I thought I was gonna get fired because everybody was like, "Who's this kid?" Like Anthony Hopkins, for example, was like, "Who's this kid? He makes one little movie and they give him this movie." Like, what? And there was one instance it never got into like, "No, fuck you, dude." But they got when they were filming one scene when John Merrick comes to Frederick Treves' home as a guest, and David goes, "Hey, before you answer the door, just look in the mirror." Or something, like, I need to do a certain shot like with that. And Anthony Hopkins goes, "My character wouldn't do that." And he's like, just do it. And he's like, "No." And he's like, he had to just be like, "All right, fine, don't do it." And then he said, from that moment on, I vowed to never direct characters that I did not create, because if I'm the one who made them, I can be like, "No, he would do that."
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And of course, he later would direct characters that he didn't come up with the Straight Story.
Yeah.
What else we got?
Well.
Also, Hopkins later, I don't know if he apologized, but I think later publicly he was like, "Yeah, I probably was a little too hard on him. Like, he did a good job," because the movie got nominated for 8 Oscars, which we'll get to. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, he did an all right job.
He did all right. I mean, he didn't win any.
So even with so this was filmed in London, right? And with that, where was it that we were talking about how like the way it goes in London or in the UK is like
Aliens, James Cameron.
Yeah. They hated him because they're like, who is this guy? He didn't do his time. Like, I'm sure the culture was still pretty similar at that time too, from maybe even worse.
Right. This is like probably 6 years before that. Where like with James Cameron, he made the Terminator. Nobody had seen the Terminator in England, or nobody on the crew had seen it. So all of a sudden, this American guy shows up, and they're like, "What the hell?" They had a different way of working. They had some quarrels. Cameron hated the British crew. With this, I don't know, because Cameron did have an actual crew on the Terminator, so he was accustomed to a certain way of working. But with this, David Lynch, was filming for 4 years sporadically and was just it was going very slow because he was doing all the work. So I don't know if he would have had enough previous experience professionally directing a movie to have a problem with how the British did it.
That's true.
It could have been like, oh, this is how they do it here. Like, oh yeah, I guess you do take 5 tea breaks a day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The guy just holding a huge tea thing. I love that. Oh, that makes more sense. But you know what I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially because also people thought he was English. I thought he was English before I even saw a clip of him like a few years ago when I was watching all of his movies. I was like, I look at him, I was like, yeah, he looks like he's British, and he just looks like he's like, well, you bloody, whatever. But then you hear him talking, he's like, if you forget an idea, you want to commit suicide. You ever see that video?
Yeah.
Look up after you're done watching this. Don't click off. I swear to God, don't click off. But look up David Lynch. Never let David Lynch forget an idea.
Yeah.
But also John Hurt, who's a very good actor. He speaks of aliens. He was in Alien. He's the original guy that the chest burster comes out of in the first Alien when they're all like just chowing down on like big bowls of rice, and he's like, oh yeah, and then he's like, oh, and then it blows up. He's also in Spaceballs. They did the chest burster scene in Spaceballs with Mel Brooks, where it busts out of him and he goes, not again. That's like my dad's favorite joke of all time. So he would wake up at 4, and then get to the set at 5, and then at noon they would finish putting the makeup on him. So 7 hours later, then he would film until 10 p.m. So film for 10 hours, and then take, let's say, an hour, maybe 2, to get the makeup off.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God, so he's sleeping 4 hours a night? Not even. But he had a day break in between his shooting days.
Oh, okay.
So it would be, what I just explained. Then he would go home, sleep in, and then he would come for and they would do rehearsals for his scenes. And then he would, go to bed early.
Just treacherous.
Yeah.
Either way.
Imagine just being in a giant suit with no cooling system.
No cooling system, and knowing, well,
This
is one of the things where they had to talk. They were talking about when they were trying to cast him for the role. They were reluctant to tell him that he had to wear all that stuff because, most actors wouldn't want to take a role if they were like, oh, they're not going to know my face after I do the, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be recognizable to people. Like they might know my name, but they're not going to know my face that well. So they were like kind of scared to tell him, but they told him, and he was still all down for it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure John Hurt seems like an actor who, like sort of like Leo we talked about in Titanic, where he wanted a challenge.
Yeah,
and it wasn't until he was convinced that it would be a challenge that he was interested in doing it. But also, speaking of casting, when you're doing like the casting call, apparently in the newspaper they were looking for extras for like the carnival sequence. And they put an ad in the paper saying "Live Freaks Wanted," and they got in trouble because like, don't call them freaks. Like, what do you? So I just thought that was funny.
On October 10th, 1980, The Elephant Man was released in theaters and received excellent reviews from critics and made $26 million domestically off a $5 million budget. It was also nominated for 8 Oscars. Lynch was nominated for Best Directing and Best Adapted Screenplay.
This movie was a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Because we talked about, it got nominated for 8 Oscars. He got directing and screenplay, but also there was no best makeup category before this movie came out. And then they made one like the year after, or a couple of years after. So it never got an award for that, but it basically was the reason why they started to have one, because people saw this and were like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, it's not exactly the same, but I remember in 2009, so the movies that were released in 2008, the Oscars, they only had 5 movies would be nominated for Best Picture. That was it. There was no more. And then The Dark Knight came out, and it didn't get nominated. And they weren't like, oh, we should have nominated The Dark Knight. Let's make it 10. But they realized that like maybe we should just expand it to 10 movies. So it's like it doesn't have to be 10. But at the Oscars, it's like they can either make it 5 nominees, or they can make it 9, 7. It has to be anywhere between 5 and 10. You know what I mean? Not important.
Speaking of makeup, just because you just were talking about it, do you know why it was filmed in black and white?
Why?
Or well, one of the reasons why it was filmed in black and white is because they knew that if it was in color, the makeup would throw the audience off. But in black and white, you can't tell that there's so much makeup all over the place.
That's a good point.
So it just worked better in black and white for that specific reason. And then again, it also helps with it being a period piece that it helps.
Yeah, it's sort of just like a happy
time.
not a happy accident, but like killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. That's a good point. So I have here that, of course, at the time when Eraserhead, and still, it's not really like what you call a conventional movie, right? But I think in this, Lynch sort of still has a lot of the style of Eraserhead, and then when he's making this movie, it still bleeds into the Elephant Man, and the Elephant Man, obviously, he's moving to a more conventional narrative, but it feels like he's not. I don't want to say like he's holding, like he was using it as a crutch, but it felt like he was holding Eraserhead's hand in the beginning of being like, all right, let me just hold Eraserhead's hand while I figure out how to make like a normal movie, sort of, right? I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm explaining it in a crude way, but this is just the way I see it. Because you watch the beginning of the movie, and like, of course, with Eraserhead, you have like it's in space. There's this big giant like planet or head or ball that's floating, and Harry Spencer is just floating around. It's like this big cosmic dreamlike experience. And in this, it sort of opens in a similar way where you have the elephant and the mom, and there's like all this imagery, and there's the stars, and that you see what was they use David Lynch uses this very thick smoke to basically symbolize John Merrick, whose real name actually was Joseph Merrick, being born. And so it sort of starts from like this fever dream state, and then even when we get to like the regular scenes of like it's one of the first scenes we see that's like a regular traditional scene is Frederick Treves, played by Anthony Hopkins, walking down the street, and he goes into the freak show. And even in that scene, you hear the mechanical turn of industry that we talked about earlier. Only now it's not Philadelphia or anything, or it's basically the turning of the industry of the the machine modernization of the second industrial revolution. Essentially, this is like 1880s. The story. Which I think was interesting. But in the first half hour, like it feels sort of like, oh, I can feel Eraserhead because of the sound and stuff and some of that imagery. And then essentially when you're 75% of the movie, pretty much all the traces of Eraserhead are sort of gone until a dream sequence that John Merrick has, and then the sequence where he dies at the end and he goes up, the camera goes up to and starts floating through the stars in space. And the mom is like, oh, everything's fine now, that kind of thing. Which I thought was very interesting. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, well, that's what I start to think about, because I had heard that this movie was a lot different than the rest of his films in terms of like it doesn't have as many abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he had struggled, like you said, he's still holding the hand of Eraserhead, and he's like, for him to know that the reason he got the film from Mel Brooks is because Mel Brooks saw it and loved him. Like, I wonder if he struggled to know where the line was to like add his own spice to it and just stay to where they wanted it to be the main.
Add his own spice. Well, he knew he was going to direct Dune, so he was like, I got to add some spice to this.
Oh, that's a good.
I'm so goddamn good, dude.
Dune 1989. Go straight into Dune.
I was about to say these people are never going to click off this video. Then you would Dune. All right, cool. Yeah. So basically, what you think about this movie is that I'm a genius.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This might be my favorite. This might be my favorite David Lynch movie.
Really?
For me, like, this just comes down to personal taste. I like all of David Lynch's movies, except for Dune. He doesn't have one movie where I'm like, fuck that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it might just be a coincidence, or it might be because it's so earnest and heartfelt, that Straight Story and Eraserhead are my two favorites. And I also like Inland Empire a lot. And we'll get to that because that's actually a very optimistic movie, surprisingly. And also Twin Peaks, which is also sort of a more traditional, earnest thing in some sense. Mostly the original series, not anything fucking after that, which we'll get to. There's one thing that I thought about this where I was like, the one thing that I got cued into where I was like, what the fuck does that mean? It's one of the first scenes with Frederick Treves where he's doing surgery on a guy who got messed up in a machine, like a factory accident. And Frederick Treves says, these things, they're abominations, these things, these machines. And I'm like, okay, why are we seeing this? Because obviously it's taking place during the Second Industrial Revolution. So all these things that are new, all these new inventions. And sort of like the same way, like all these damn kids with their phones these days, he's sort of saying that these machines, they're lead to nothing but, so I'm like, why is this thematically relevant to be put in this movie? And the fact that he uses the word abomination is what cued me into it, because abomination is what somebody would definitely describe. Somebody, I guess an ignorant person back then would definitely describe John Merrick as, like, this guy's an abomination, don't worry about it. I'm like, why are they? So what's the thing here? Like, what's the parallel? What's the connection between John Merrick and like the machines of industry? And I saw a quote from David Lynch in this book, Lynch on Lynch. He says Merrick's face looked like explosions on his body, which inspired the contrast of smokestacks and soot and industry like exploding around him. And like he wanted to show Merrick as sort of like humans, as sort of like these mini factories, so that's probably what he was going for. Also, that's like the only time I've seen Lynch describe anything in his movies.
Yeah,
because people always ask like, hey, what does Mulholland Drive mean? And he's like, oh well. What do you think it means? Like that kind of thing. It's sort of like, remember when we were talking about Kubrick? Now Kubrick was like, you never talk about what the movie means. And then there was a guy from like Asia who was doing an interview with Kubrick over the phone, and he goes, what does the ending of 2001 mean? And he goes, well, so it's like he's in a zoo at the end, like that. And then he just explains The Shining to him before the movie even came out. He's like, yeah, so at The Shining, it's like there's these ghosts and stuff.
Yeah,
it's like holy shit. So yeah, that was very interesting to me. I most of the like it's when I like a movie, sometimes it feels harder to talk about. But with this, it really emotionally struck me the first time I watched it. I'm like, this is a really great movie. And then this time I watched it, it also struck me emotionally as well. Just the scenes where she Frederick Treves' wife is like, good to meet you, John Merrick, and he starts crying, and he's like, a woman has never just been so kind to me. And it's like, fuck.
Dune, 1983. The rights to a movie based on Frank Herbert's Dune were hot potatoed around the industry for a decade. In 1971, independent producer Arthur Jacobs optioned the rights from Herbert but died shortly after. 3 years later, a French consortium got the rights and hired Alejandro Jodorowsky to direct. But that project fell through after 2 years of pre-production. In 1976, Dino De Laurentiis bought the rights for $2 million.
I'm so glad you got De Laurentiis. That was impressive. Okay, so Dune, of course, was the best-selling novel of all time. If you want to add 7 hours to this podcast, you can call our friend Mark and just say Dune. He'll go, oh my god, so okay, the third book, and then people are really like, we're just kind of blaming Mark this episode.
Mark, yeah, what the heck?
So Jodorowsky's Dune. There's one of my cousins talked to me. He's a really big fan. He's a Chilean filmmaker, Alejandro Jodorowsky. Not my cousin.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So, I didn't know your cousin had game.
Yeah, but he loves him, and he always talks about he was telling me about the Dune. He was gonna make Dune, and I'm pretty sure he told me this. I don't know if I saw this on the internet or my cousin told me, but he goes, at one point, Charlotte Rampling was cast, who was ended up being in the other Dune, with Denis Villeneuve recently, but she was cast, and they had all this stuff, and they're about to go, and there was one scene that he needed 10,000 extras all to defecate at the same time on screen.
What?
And then for some reason the movie never got made.
Yeah,
I don't know why. But there's a documentary you can watch on it called Jodorowsky's Dune if you're interested in making that movie. It's its own thing. It could probably be its own episode if we wanted to make its own episode. But I feel weird making a podcast about that because there's a documentary specifically about it. I don't know. So Dino hired Frank Herbert, Dino De Laurentiis, who was a producer. He did I believe he did Gangs of New York with Scorsese. Is that true?
Dino did?
Let me make sure that's true. All right. I don't know why I thought he did Gangs of New York. It was probably just another Italian guy that I got confused with. But he did movies like Dino De Laurentiis did movies like Flash Gordon, Conan the Barbarian, Death Wish, things like that. And he hired Frank Herbert to write the script. And you know what I also knew? I found out I go, Dilo De Laurentiis. I go, I'm looking up his daughter or whatever, and then I go on her IMDb, and her IMDb picture is the picture of this cooking lady that I always used to watch. Like it's a picture of the Raffaella De Laurentiis, who's Dino's daughter, and this other lady called Giada. And I always used to see my mom watch her on the cooking channel, and I go, Mom, you didn't tell me that Giada De Laurentiis was Dino De Laurentiis' granddaughter. And she's like, I told you that. I'm like, bullshit. I go, who? You don't even know who he is.
Yeah. Mom
She's just like, what the fuck? So I thought that was very interesting. That kind of blew my mind when I was doing the research for this. So Raffaella De Laurentiis, she saw Elephant Man, and she recommended to her dad, like, hey, we're trying to make Dune. Maybe you should look at this guy. Also, around this time, George Lucas offered Return of the Jedi to David Lynch.
Oh my!
Did you know that?
I would love to see that.
And David Lynch said no.
No.
Because he was because first of all he's like, I don't give a shit, but also he was like, George, you should direct these movies. Like, why are you just producing them? Because apparently George Lucas had his own things about why he didn't direct them, but he was like, this is your story, like you should direct it. He said, I don't want to direct it, and then he ended up directing just I guess the original Star Wars sort of. Let's see. So Lynch goes in and meets with Dino. And he was people were like, oh, you're headed into the lion's den, pal. Dino's a tough guy. And he walks in, he got along with him great. And they signed a contract. And David Lynch goes, I knew I shouldn't have signed the contract. I knowingly knew that it was a bad contract to sign because I knew I signed up for less money than I wanted. And I did not get final cut. And he's like, this movie made me learn that when I make a movie, I always need to have final cut. Because otherwise, what's the point of making the movie? Because you can have, let's say a perfect in your head, like a perfect 2 hour and 40-minute movie, and then somebody comes in and goes, no, we got to make it under 2 hours for some reason, and you're like, Jesus Christ! I saw Captain America 4 last night, and that's probably exactly what happened with that movie, where they were like so concerned with getting to the next moment that you never got to spend a moment with the moment in the movie. Anyway, he loved but Lynch said that he sold out on his part when he signed that contract. And before we get into like the filming, this is the craziest story of all time. So there's like a script meeting they have, right? And Dino goes, David, you should come out to Italy, come out to Sicily, whatever. And he goes, okay, I'll go out there. We'll have a script meeting. And he goes in, and Dino and Raffaella is in the passenger seat. There's the driver, and I'm sitting in between Dino and his producer or his assistant, whatever. And they're going this car is going like 100 miles an hour. It feels like. And Dino turns to me and he goes, David, I'm going to tell you a story. And he tells him, and this is also when I mentioned how in the audiobook Lynch isn't reading the book. He's just like sort of just talking off the top of his head. He goes, I'm going to tell you a story. He says, one day I got a call from Sammy Cohen, who's the head of whatever studios. And he tells, oh no, I'm sorry, it was Harry Cohen. Like in the audiobook, Lynch is saying this. And he goes, so Harry Cohen, and he calls Dino, and he goes, Dino, oh, it's terrible. They're going to ruin their lives. And Dino's like, just calm down. What's happening? And he goes, Sammy Davis Jr. wants to marry Kim Novak. Of course, this is the 1950s. Sammy Davis Jr. is a black man, and Kim Novak is a white woman. And they're like, they're going to ruin their lives. We have to stop this. And Dino goes, do you want me to make a call? And he goes, yes, will you? So he calls whoever he knows in Vegas. In the morning of this is apparently true. I looked this up. And the morning of the wedding, it's like 6 a.m, and Sammy Davis Jr. is like waking up, he's getting ready, and there's banging on the door, and they're like, let us in. And he's like, what's going on? Like they open the door, and the assistant's like, oh my God, Mr. Davis. And they're like, hey, like, what are you doing? He's like, well, they go, you're getting married today. And he goes, yeah, I know I'm getting married. I'm getting ready. You're stopping me from get out of here. And he goes, no, you're not getting married to Kim Novak. You're coming with us. And they put him in a car, and they brought him to go get married to a black lady. I think her name was like Lietta Wright.
That is nuts.
I forget her name, but yeah,
that's
a crazy
true?
story. Apparently, that's true. I looked it up. There was like mob guys who did stop him from marrying her. And I'm not gonna say David Lynch made up that story. Like Dino probably told him that.
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, if nobody will, this
No,
won't come
guy's
back to
not
bite
gonna
me in
tell
50
anyone.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just an insane story that apparently is truth to it.
Oh my gosh. Filming on Dune got underway in Mexico April 1983 with a budget of $40 million with Kyle MacLachlan in the lead role of Paul Atreides.
So, obviously Lynch talks about how this is like a failure on all fronts and stuff, but I do think I do think his experiences on this movie were very fruitful because he ended up finding a lot of actors that he would use later. Of course, Kyle MacLachlan he would use as sort of like, the sort of like the Robert De Niro to his Martin Scorsese in a sense,
Yeah.
not exactly as many movies, but he also found Everett McGill, who played Stilgar in Dune and also played Big Ed Hurley in Twin Peaks, who's great, and he was also, I think, Tom, the lawnmower salesman in Straight Story as well. Freddie Jones, who he had already used in Elephant Man, he played I forget his name, the Elephant Man's handler. John Merrick's like handler, basically the guy who owned him. He was like the slave owner of John. I forget his name. So that's him. He was also in this. He would also be in Wild at Heart as well. Jack Nance, of course, came back, and Dean Stockwell was also in this movie. Dean Stockwell also ended up in Blue Velvet. So Kyle MacLachlan, his casting, he just graduated from acting school in the fall of 1982, I think, and the casting director Joanna Ray, I believe she was working with David Lynch at this point. Whoever the casting director was went to like some local theater stuff, and he was on stage performing Tartuffe, which is like an old play. I don't know anything about stage plays, but he was doing that. So he'd never been in a movie before. This was his first movie role, is leading a $40 million movie, which is the equivalent of like a $180 million movie today, probably.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know what I mean? If you look at behind the scenes interviews or like behind the scenes footage of the set, like B-roll, you'll always notice that David Lynch calls Kyle MacLachlan, he calls him Kale. And he calls him Kale because Dino De Laurentiis couldn't say Kyle. He would go, Kyle. Kale. So then Lynch started calling him Kale his entire life.
Oh, really?
I do think Lynch, because if you look in let's say 4 or 5 years, in 4 years, he went from not having a job, his mother-in-law is calling him a loser. You should, Mary, you should leave this guy. He's not going anywhere. And then 4 years later, he's directing a $40 million movie, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to say he was in over his head, but I do think it probably overwhelmed him in a sense directorially because there's some stories like they're shooting in the dunes of Mexico. It's like 110 degrees, and they're wearing these big leather suits and stuff. There's like people fainting on set, and Lynch is like with Kyle MacLachlan with the camera, just getting a close up of his eye, and they're like, David, we can probably just get this like on a set somewhere. Like we don't have to do this right now. Like you have to basically be very strategic with your time. Like okay, I can spend 30 minutes shooting his eye, which will put us back 2 hours, or I can just go right back to the wide shots and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But they were filming in Mexico, right? So Lynch talked about how you can't drink the water in Mexico. And he goes, one of the things that because we always just had like bottled water or whatever, but one of the things that one of the locals told me is when you go in the shower, get a big bottle of vodka and then just take a swig of it and keep the vodka in your mouth throughout the shower. And any water that gets in your mouth, the alcohol in the vodka will kill whatever bacteria is in there that makes the water so annoying for us Americans to drink. I don't know why. I guess it's just like
It's just different water.
It's crazy to me.
I mean, it's like someone in Mexico who drinks the water all the time, their body's accustomed to it, and then
Yeah, it
we
makes
just
sense.
drink
Why?
it.
But why is it Mexico? Like, is that other countries too, or is it just Mexico?
I don't know. I don't know, honestly.
So the guy who played Leto Atreides, which is Paul Atreides' dad, his name was Jurgen Prochnow. I don't know exactly how to say it. And so there was the scene where he has to bite the fake tooth and release that toxic air or a toxic smoke gas that kills Baron Harkonnen and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. And Lynch was like, well, we can't get the shot right. Do you think so we can we can put the tube and get it in there without like any camera trickery? Do you think Jurgen would be willing to cut a hole in his face so that we can put the tube in there, and then it just comes out of his mouth. And they're all like, "No, you can't cut a."
Just cut him.
He goes, "Yeah, can we do some surgery to cut his face open?"
Oh my
And they were like, "No, we cannot do that." So what they had to do is sort of film it from an angle, like let's say the tube came out from here. They had to like put the tube so that it went in and like
Came
bent back out,
without-
so it kind of did like a Z pattern in his mouth.
Yeah.
And it would come out and whatever. And they just had to put the camera over here, which Lynch didn't want to do. But he was like, "Screw it, I can't. If I can't cut my actor's face open, I guess I'll have to
Yeah.
shoot. I guess I'll just put the camera a little bit to the left."
Yeah.
And so they go, "And action," and they start, and all of a sudden the actor Jurgen goes, "Ah, fuck, fuck, fuck," and it turns out that the steam was so hot that it burnt the inside of his mouth.
And then David Lynch was like, "Well, there's a hole there now. We might as well use it."
Yeah, exactly. He's like, "I told you." So I thought that was just, I don't, again, that's just a good story into David Lynch's personality, where he's like, "Why wouldn't you cut a hole in your mouth for this
Yeah,
movie?"
yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's still him learning, I guess, that's not
Him
an
learning
okay
that you
thing.
can't, surgically,
Yeah, it's a good
surgically
thing, yeah.
manipulate an actor's face.
Yeah.
Of course, Sting played Fade Rutha, whatever his name is, who's the nephew of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. But there's a scene in this movie where the Harkonnen's doing something crazy and weird, like spitting on people, and he goes, "Isn't that right?" And Sting, and then Sting walks out all sweaty, and he's like in just underwear, like
Yeah.
rubber underwear, and he's like, "Yeah, uncle," and he's like, it's like a weirdly
Yeah, they're all,
homoerotic
like-
scene, and Sting goes, "Yeah, I remember me, I didn't want to do it. I was like, I signed up for Dune, and I'm doing something weird, homoerotic scene, like I don't want to do it." And then Lynch, all of a sudden, Lynch just shows me the underwear, and he goes, "All right, put this on. You're gonna wear this." And he goes, "I'm not gonna wear this." And he goes, "Yes, you are." And I go, "No, I'm not." And he goes, "Yes, you are." And he goes, "No, I'm not." And he goes, "Yes, you are." And he goes, "Fine." And then they did the scene, which is just a funny back and forth between them. Lynch was always people always refer to him as like a Boy Scout, where I guess there was patches in his life where he didn't want to curse, and then he would. So like before Dune, he would be like, "Oh golly gee," like that kind of thing. But then during Dune, he started cursing again. And also I think he quit smoking in 1973. And then during Dune, he started again because now he was like, "I'm a Hollywood director." He was sort of living in a bubble to a certain extent because he only had the people in the industry around him. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm cool now. I'm kind of hot shit." And he started, from just the stress, he started smoking again. And he started cursing more on set, according to Mary Fisk, who was married to him at the time. And principal photography ended in September 1983, but another 4 months was spent in Mexico doing miniature work and other special effects shots. So Lynch was there for like still months and months after. And then in February, he finally left Mexico. Now, there was one lady called Eva Bernstein who he sort of had a fling with while he was shooting this movie. Mary Fisk was back home. I think they moved to Virginia. And again, like I don't want to get too into his personal, but it's still now this is history. So there's lady Eva Bernstein. They met at like a party somewhere, and she talks about how she kind of sort of fell in love with David Lynch. They saw each other at the airport just by happenstance afterwards, and like they kissed through like the barrier, like it's sort of like a romantic scene or whatever. And she talks about, and I'm only bringing this up because it's gossipy, but it gave me some good insight into David's like psyche sort of, where she talked about how when he was with me, he liked the thrill of like the art life and being like an artist and not knowing what was going to happen next and stuff like that. But he also needed the comfort of that sort of Midwest suburban home life at the same time. And he was sort of asking from both from her, and that she can only give him one of those things. And of course, Mary can only give him one of those things as well. And I thought that was just a very interesting dilemma or sort of dichotomy in his romantic life that I think was important to bring up.
It seems like something that's common throughout his whole life. Like when he was younger, he felt like he was living 3 different lives.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Here you bring up he wants 2 separate things that you can only get from one kind of life.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was he got more depressed the further he went into editing, because he goes, when obviously making a movie is hard, but the closer you get to the final movie being done, if the movie sucks, the worse you feel, because the more you're locked in to be, "Oh, this is gonna suck. This is really gonna suck. Oh, this is definitely gonna suck," because you can't change it. So they were editing, and I think the first cut was either 4.5 hours or 5 hours and 15 minutes, and they cut it down to 217, and Dino wanted it shorter. And I think Lynch, his preferred version of the movie was about 3 hours long, and Dino was like, no, make it 217 and it'll be fine. And then Dino actually later admitted, like, years later, that we killed that movie in the editing room. So apparently there is a good movie somewhere buried on the cutting room floor. I don't know how good it, because I don't know. We'll get to it when we talk about overall thoughts. But Lynch talked about, he goes, I never really felt like I had permission to make Dune on my own and make it as I wanted to. I was always compromising and always making compromises throughout the entire production. And this is sort of like a Stanley Kubrick Spartacus situation, or a David Lynch Dune situation, which is like, I see those as the first independent director, makes a good movie, and then Marvel hires him to direct a movie. Then he directs the movie. Marvel doesn't let him direct it. There's some studio interference. They fuck up the edit, and then he's like, fuck. And then he doesn't make another Marvel movie, right? That's Spartacus is Stanley Kubrick's Marvel movie. Dune is David Lynch's Marvel movie, I think.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
I mean, what do you expect from me, dude?
I mean, like, for me, saying the original cut, obviously 5 hours or so is too long, but it sounds like it's a part 1 and 2 kind of thing that should be happening, or part, like.
Right, yeah. We'll get to it. There's basically, like, this should be 3 movies, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I've never read the books, but just based off how Dune 1 and 2, the recent ones, came out, I could see how if David Lynch had permission to do it the way he wanted to, he could do a lot with all the abstract kind of things and like the spooky kind of things that are happening, so I mean, it's clear that he didn't have full range to do what he wanted with this one.
Yeah. In retrospect, like, David Lynch directed Dune, but it kind of makes sense, like, especially when they talk about the water of life. And again, like, it would have been good if he had, because I talked about Captain America and the moments and how it never really had time to spend time on a moment. Like, it was just like, oh, we can't spend time on this moment. We got to go to the next one. But then the time you get to that moment, they're like, well, we got to go to the next one, right? With this, especially in the second half, it is that. And there's a lot of stuff that David Lynch probably could have been able to do with that material if he had more than 10 minutes to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas, like, one sequence in that book from that he's adapting probably should have taken 10 minutes,
On December 14th, 1984, Dune was released in the U.S. and was a critical and commercial flop, grossing $31 million domestically off a $40 million budget. However, it did receive an Oscar nomination for Best Sound.
So, adjusted for inflation, imagine a movie comes out today and it's like a $122 million movie that makes like 137 worldwide, which it would need to make. It's usually around double the production budget. Also, $122 million today. That's sort of like, oh, that's like a mid-budgeted movie now. Like Mickey 17 is like 120 apparently, right? That's coming out soon. But you have to understand, even the adjusted for inflation thing is not even a good indicator of how big of a movie it was, because back then 120 million adjusted, $40 million was like the biggest movie. It would be like, it's the equivalent of like a $300 million movie today, because of course, we're spending more on movies, not just adjusted for inflation, but in actual real money, right? So when you look at like 122, it doesn't sound that big, but it for that time, it's like 300 million actually. The Dune premiere was at the Kennedy Center on December 3rd, and Lynch met Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan at the White House, which is pretty cool. So now he's going from being a loser, being like, you better settle up, young boy, because you're never going to be a filmmaker, to I met the president. Yeah. Because I made a movie, even though the movie kind of sucks. Don't even worry about that part. But also, Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, did like it actually. And Lynch said that he felt like he sold out and died twice. He died twice because the movie sucked, and he died another time because he sold out. Yeah. And then he was halfway through a script with the writers of Elephant Man, Christopher DeVore and Eric Bergen, for a sequel to Dune. They were writing a sequel while it bombed. And apparently the sequel would have been. They said it would have been like a neighborhood story, the same way like that Blue Velvet, or something is a neighborhood story. You know what I mean?
And
I'm
it
like,
was still gonna be Dune.
yeah. And I was like, I don't know.
Like it would have just been in like the United States kind of thing.
No, like it would have been like focusing on like how communities in Arrakis like live. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
There's not that much detail.
I
But
was like, they're just gonna transport into the.
yeah, that'd be
like,
funny if it was just Dune 2, but it's just there in the U.S.
I didn't
now.
know what you meant. I was like, what?
Dune Velvet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to get into overall thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
So when I watch this movie, because I don't really like dunking on movies and being like, yeah, well, guess what? They tried this, didn't work. But I think the two main flaws for me in this movie are, if you look the beginning, right? It's 10 to 15 minutes in, and it's like the first 10 minutes is just straight up exposition. And there's people these days will be like, oh, there's a lot of exposition in that movie. I don't really mind exposition because I get it.
Yeah.
But in this, it's literally just a girl. Like I feel like the first 5 minutes is literally just the princess being like, in 2,000 years ago and stuff. It's like, okay, I'm willing to accept it because she's hot. It's fine. I can look at her, right? But then there's like another 10-minute scene after that where the emperor and this big slug guy and that they start talking about. They just tell you the whole movie, or at least the first 75% of it, and then the movie happens and that all happens.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like, you could have just cut that 10-minute scene of being like, you must kill Leto Atreides. What about Paul? Well, if he does something, this is what we'll do too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you just didn't tell us that, and then now you have an extra 10 or 15 minutes to, for us to get to know Paul, do the world building stuff, see how this world works, and it'll add more tension and suspense to the scene because we don't know what's going to happen. But then you telling us, hey, this is going to happen, by the way. It's like, well, what the fuck? There's, I think it's Ocean's 8, the remake they did with all the ladies. It was funny, but I think they go, here's how the heist is going to work. We're going to do this. We're going to go in there to the Met Gala, and then we're going to take it, and that's how it's going to happen.
And
then it just happens. And you're like, let's say it was 10 minutes. So, that was that was pretty much the first flaw with it. But the second flaw was the fact that first half that I just mentioned was like the strongest section of the movie, because it does, even though there's a lot of exposition and there are flaws to it and they could have cut stuff out, it is the most patient part of the movie. The first half is pretty. The first half, in the first hour, they probably cover the same amount as the new Dune movie covered in the first hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the same chunk of the book story. I'm gonna try not to compare it too much. I will just articulate my points better. Later, I don't think it should have been. One should have been as good as the other. But the second section of the movie is like, it's like they wrote a script and they're like, this is going good, dude. And then they got to page 90 and we're like, wait, the script has to end in 30 pages.
Yeah, we have to finish this now.
So then they just do 2.5 movies in like an hour. So that's the thing where I was talking about, where it's like, if David, like we talked about, like what could have David Lynch brought to Dune? Like he could have had like the Water of Life sequence, which is like this like intense experience that is supposed to kill all men. David Lynch could have done something awesome with that visually if he was given the time. Maybe he did, and they cut it out.
Yeah.
But they were like, well, we can stay on this section for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or we can just cut this and get to this faster, and then we can make it, we can make it 2 hours and 17 minutes instead of 3 hours, right? But they go through like 2.5 movies over the course of like 45 minutes. It's insane. It's a breakneck pace. There's one scene where he meets Everett McGill, Stilgar. It's him and the mom. Paul Atreides and his mom, Lady Jessica, are like stranded in the desert in Arrakis, and they're trying to find like shelter and get away from these worms. And they run into the Fremen, which is headed by Stilgar, who's played by Everett McGill, which I already said that. I don't know why I'm saying it again. Everett McGill is a great actor, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to him later when we talk about Straight Story and Twin Peaks. And then he goes, guess what? We're going to eat you because, you're worth more. Your water is worth more to us than your fighting ability. Mm-hmm. And then they go, well, actually, it's not. Watch this. And he beats somebody up. And they're like, actually, you could stay. Cool, sick, right? It's like a 2-minute scene, right? But in the first movie, Dune, again, I'm comparing it. I shouldn't. But that was like the whole climax of the movie, that scene.
Yeah.
And they go, we're going to kill you. Actually, we're not. It's like in 2 minutes flat, right? And then he goes, oh, that's okay. Paul walks over, and then he finds Chani. And they look at each other, and she's like, I'll walk you down. And then the next scene, they're kissing, and he's like, I love you. It's like, were you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, it makes everything feel it has so much less weight even just the fact that he cares so much about Dune.
Right.
It's like why he's been. It feels like we've been here for like 10 minutes, and he's already like, I need to save this place. You know?
Or it feels like it sort of just feels like an exponential growth in speed the closer you get to the end of the movie.
Yeah.
There was a movie that came out I think last year at this point. It was called Horizon. Kevin Costner, he left Yellowstone and put like $100 million of his own money, apparently, and it might have been $100 million, into making these series of like the saga of epic westerns that were 3 hours long. And I watched the first one in theaters, and the whole thing is like actually the opposite of this. It's like it should have been a TV show, where it's like these subplots that don't really funnel into like a cohesive climax. They kind of just, it was fine, whatever. But at the end of the movie, they have like a trailer. He goes like, "Hey, guess what, Kevin Costner? Like, you got a big storm coming." And then the music kicks up, and then you start seeing all the people from the movie, and you think like, "Oh, this is just their like the final roll call, like at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, where they cut to everybody smiling at the bat symbol, and be like, he was a good guy," you know, that kind of thing. But then it keeps going for like 5 minutes. You're like, "What is going on here?" And it ends up just being a giant big trailer for the next movie that they already filmed, but they show you all the beats of the next movie.
Yeah.
So I know how the next movie ends.
Oh, really? It goes that
Yes,
far?
it shows you. Oh, guess what? Giovanni Verzibi's going to come in, and he's got to do some stuff. Oh my God!
You're like, stop.
Yes, I don't know why I'm talking about this. I'm sorry, but we'll get back to Dune. But anyway, Dune. The last hour of Dune felt like that montage at the end of Horizon, where it's just like, look at this. This happens because it's not just a montage. It shows you the actual beats of the next movie.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just going to be this again. So yeah, that's my problems with Dune. What did you think about this movie?
Yeah. Before I like completely just like, dunk on it, which I'm not going to dunk on it, but for me, watching this, it was because this was the second movie I watched out of the David Lynch movies, and I was genuinely like, oh no, like, because I hated it, and I was like, oh no, like, I don't want to like look up the general consensus over this movie just in case everyone's like, because I in my mind I thought I had seen people be like, Lynch is Dune, man. And I was like, this fucking sucks. Like, am I gonna have to like go on a podcast and like talk about it, like, and just fake that I like this movie, or because like genuinely of all the movies we've watched, just because we picked like all these really great directors, I haven't like disliked the movie yet. This is the first one. This one was the first one where I was like, this is terrible, and it's sort of because like one, I had like a come to Jesus moment where I remember walking out of Dune 1, not to compare, but I remember walking out of Dune 1 being like, why did it end there? Like, oh, there's no conclusion to the movie.
It felt like 75%.
And then you get Dune 2 and it's like, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, maybe now I need to rethink my like every movie needs to be coming to like a grand conclusion thing. And then this one, I'm like, we have I don't think it would be a good movie either way, but we have the unfortunate, like, it's unfortunate that we have to kind of compare it with the new Dune movies, where it's like,
it's so fresh in our culture.
Yeah, they're taking time with it, and it's like this one, it just feels like everything's just whipping by. I mean, I'm not gonna repeat everything you said, but that's kind of how I feel about it. It's like the main thing, but to not dunk on it, I actually really enjoyed some of the stylistic choices. Like in the beginning, like you said, I really was getting like a sense like, oh, maybe this is gonna be really good when they're talking and it's like the thing floating and he's talking through the translator, I guess. It's like translating both ways. I thought that was a cool choice to have that kind of thing.
When he's talking with the that big slug guy's talking with the Emperor.
Yeah, and they're talking back and forth, and it's moves. Like weird. Yeah, and their voices are all weird, and I like that, and that's like where you can see David Lynch coming through a little bit. Some of those choices.
There's a grossness and weirdness that is good because it's like a Lynchian grossness and weirdness.
Yeah,
where it's not just like you know.
I think
for the most part.
I think if they were able to lean in those directions, obviously it would be a lot better.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't want to go too far into like shitting on it because I don't even think David Lynch really likes it.
Well, David, yeah, he kind of disowns it. But also, but also I can totally see why somebody likes this. And also like with every movie that's like, not well received, there are I don't want to say generation, but there are like a cult following of people who probably do like this movie.
Oh yeah.
I think does this have a Criterion Collection release? I don't know, but there are people out there who are fans of this movie. And I can totally see why. But do you want to talk about the shield special effect?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It is the most. I think it might be the single most insane visual. Not even the worst. It's like I don't even know what to make of it because it's just so outside of what I can possibly have thought was possible. Of like it's such a curveball.
Yeah,
and it's.
That was.
I can't. I remember seeing that for the first time and looking at my dad, going, "Holy shit! What the fuck was that?"
Yeah,
it's the most insane visual effect I've ever seen.
I think for that's where, because the meeting happens before that. Like for me, I was still into it when the meeting was going on, when they're, what I was just talking about with the floating guy, and then it got to that part, and I was like, okay, where is this going? And then I feel like from there it's just like a decline.
Do you think audiences would have just saw that visual effect and went, "Oh, that looks," because I could see how in 1984 that might look good.
Yeah.
But do you think audiences would have had a passive reaction to those shields? Or do you think they would have been like, "What? Whoa"?
Yeah, I think they would have just been
like, "What is that?"
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that because I don't know what other movies, like specifically in 1983, like what other kind of effects were there that they were, you know what I'm saying?
In terms
like
of
what to compare it to that's like relevant at that moment. Like if I went to a movie a week before and saw another movie, was there another effect that was like kind of similar to that was like makes it less freaky?
I don't even know how they did that because it's such like a boxy, clunky thing. I don't even know if they did that because I don't think they had computers. I think the first movie to have like actual computer generated effects, or one of them, like the first landmark one, was Labyrinth. There's an opening sequence where there's like a CGI bird floating through or flying through like a black void. I don't know exactly. I think Labyrinth was 86.
So
I don't know if they
did that.
I don't know if they did computer generated effects or if it was some kind of like analog thing. I have no idea how they did it, and I don't want to know because it's such a.
I mean, if it's like some sort of weird analog thing, like analog synthesized type of effect, I don't even know how that would work. I guess that makes it cooler.
And but also you can tell that whatever it was, they did not film for it on the day. Like they weren't wearing like a reflective thing. Like a motion capture suit.
Normal.
Of course, they wouldn't have a motion capture in the 80s, but like they didn't have anything. They just said, "All right, we'll just film them fighting, and then you guys put boxes around them later."
Yeah.
It's like, okay, David. But the other two things that I want to get to, and then we'll move on because I don't like shitting on the movie, even though it's funny. Is this when those guns that they have? They go, we use the power of sound. Like the Atreides house, discovered using the power of sound as a weapon. And their power of sound is going cha-ta, and I'm like, holy shit! Like they could have, it could have just been like, I don't know.
I think that's like
whoosh,
like
a Skyrim thing, like fools for I don't know, cha-ta. It sounds like something that Ninja Turtles would say.
That's something where maybe if we had read the books, we'd understand like that. That's faithful to the book or something. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how faithful.
Starting to sound like Mark.
Well, yeah. Dude, stop talking.
Dude, right now Mark's at home like itching. Like, what is wrong? Something's happening.
No. Yeah, I don't want to talk too bad on the movie anymore, but I mean, I was stressing when I was watching it like, oh gosh, like
Well, you called me and I was like, "All right, I'll see you tomorrow." And you're like, "Yeah, Super Bowl, Also, you're like, I watched Dune the other day, and I'm like, yeah. And I go, oh yeah, and you go, yeah. Like, is that? Do people know that's a bad movie? Like, you weren't sure how people,
It's like I don't want to like.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, David Lynch just passed away. I don't want to like come on here and be like, but I literally in the car before this was like doing some last minute. Just like listening, and the interviewer was like, "Do you want to talk about Dune?" And he goes, "No." He just doesn't like Dune, so I'm like, "All right, yeah."
Yeah, and also like I don't want to. Obviously, we're spending a lot of time on it, but like I don't want to make it seem like we're making fun of this movie because the people who made it are incompetent. The people who made this movie are probably more competent than we'll ever be because the level of craftsmanship that these people have to build the sets to the cinematographers, David Lynch at the time, like they do have a lot of skill, and a lot of these things like movies aren't. most movies aren't made aren't bad because the filmmakers and the crew were bad.
Yeah.
It's just something happens in the editing, and there's a certain machine that happens to a movie where it just kind of gets fucked up in the edit. And even that doesn't even mean the editor's bad. The editor can just be doing whatever money guy is telling him to do, right? So, and that's probably most likely what happened with Dune. The Dune wasn't because anybody was particularly incompetent. It was just something that happened in the editing and a certain pressure that was there.
Yeah, that's important to get across. Like the style of the movie is still there.
Yeah.
And yeah, if it was 5 hours long, I would sit down now and watch a 5 hour cut of this just to see.
I have a curiosity about this as like an artifact of cinema history. The same way I don't some people might get mad about this, but like I think this is like a comparable thing to this might be like the Snyder Cut.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it got butchered. It was supposed to be 3 hours. It's based off of like a very beholden sci-fi piece of literature. You know what I mean? And now the Snyder Cut's like an artifact of it's a strange artifact of film history, which I like, even whether you like it or not. And I don't even think that I'm not gonna get into the Snyder Cut.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a whole nother.
By saying that, I just saved the audience 20 minutes because I would have gotten into it anyway.
Well, I think one thing we can take out of this too is when David Lynch talks about like something he learned from Dune is that he wants to make sure he gets final cut. So I don't think for him to say that, I don't think that means because if he would have said like make sure you have like creative control or something, that's different than like having final cut means that he thinks there was still a good movie in there, and if he was able to do the final cut, then they would have been better.
Yeah, like even Dino De Laurentiis said like we destroyed that movie in the editing, suggesting that there was a good movie in there.
Blue Velvet, 1986. According to Lynch, the good thing about the failure of Dune was that there was nowhere to go but up. And when Dino De Laurentiis asked Lynch what he wanted to do next, Lynch said Blue Velvet.
So before Dune, Lynch was with a producer named Richard Roth, who produced a movie called Julia, I think in 1972 with Jane Fonda and some other couple of ladies. Richard Roth was like, hey, what do you got? Because the Elephant Man just came out. So he's like, what do you got, pal? And he goes, well, I always wanted to sneak into a girl's room at night and spy on her, and it would lead me to a mystery. And Richard Roth goes, I love it. And I'm like, okay. And then he, that idea sort of sparked into Blue Velvet a little bit. And he wrote a couple of drafts of it. And this is before Dune. And then I think he wrote 2 drafts of Dune, of Blue Velvet, I'm sorry. And then filmed Dune and then went back to Blue Velvet. And Dino De Laurentiis, he still had a good relationship with. You think after a failure like Dune, they would be like, fuck you. Right?
Yeah.
But they understood like what happened. And Dino goes, what do you want to do next? And Lynch goes, well, I have the script Blue Velvet that I'd like to do. And he goes, do you own it? And he goes, yeah, I think I own it. And he's like, yeah, why wouldn't I? I wrote the script. Why wouldn't I own it? It turns out Lynch did not own the script anymore because what happened is when he pitched it to Warner Brothers. Before Dune, he pitched it to Warner Brothers. And his lawyer didn't tell him that by pitching it to Warner Brothers, something with the rights would go to them, or
they get the option.
Right, like if he didn't do anything with the script, it entered turnaround. So I think let me make sure what turnaround is. So turnaround is if you don't do anything by a certain time period with the script, the rights revert back to Warner Brothers. So the deal, it's like, hey, we don't want this right now, but like if you don't find anybody else to do this with, then the rights go back to us. Something like that. And I forget it.
It's like a lose-lose for the writer.
Right, I don't know exactly how it works. It's something like that, right? Yeah. But his lawyer didn't tell him, so he's like, "What the fuck, dude?" So luckily, Dino went and bought the script back from him. And Dino goes, "Let me read the script." And he goes, "No, it sucks. I don't. I only have a few drafts." He goes, "I'll give you the first half because I like the first half, but the second half isn't really there yet." He talked about how he toiled over the second half not being very good, because he wrote, like, let's say he was 4 drafts in, and he's like, I still don't have the ending. And what happened is he goes, I had to go into some meeting somewhere, and while I was sitting in the meeting, I suddenly remembered a dream I had the night before, and I started to have ideas. Like the dreams gave me ideas to complete the end of the script, the end of Blue Velvet. So he goes, and I get up, I go to the receptionist, I go, give me a pen and paper, come on. And then she's like, okay. And then he writes all of the ideas down. And what the ideas were that he had to dream about were the police radio, like the walkie-talkie that Jeffrey would have, excuse me, at the end where he tricks Dennis Hopper, and the fact that he would tell Dennis Hopper, or he would tell Detective Williams, hey, I'm in the back room. I'm in the bathroom, knowing that Frank Booth would be hearing it. That came from David Lynch's dream. The gun in the Detective Williams' partner's jacket, the guy with the yellow jacket who's like dead standing up, that guy. And Frank's disguise, when he's like, yeah, he was also the guy with the mustache. Remember, he was taking the pictures, and he goes, yes, your detective partner was also seen with this guy. I don't know who he is, right? And then it turns out at the end that it was Frank Booth with a disguise on. That's how he escaped the warehouse shootout. So those are the ideas that basically saved the script from him. And while they were sort of finalizing the deal, Dino and David, David Lynch goes, yeah, I want to make it for $10 million. And he goes, but I want final cut. And he goes, David, like, I want to give you final cut, but I cannot write into the contract that you get final cut, because then other directors I work with, it sets a precedent. Then I have to give them final cut. And I don't know if I want to give them final cut because I don't know them as well as you, and I don't have as much confidence in them as you. And so David's like, what can you do? And he goes, I'll tell you what, if you cut the budget in half and cut your salary in half, you have my word and a handshake deal with me that you will get final cut. I just cannot put it in the contract. And David Lynch said, okay.
It's kind of nuts. I mean, it's just like it almost seems like hearing that kind of seems like he's getting taken advantage of a little bit, because it's not a small thing to ask, like cut the budget and your, but because David Lynch is like a true artist, he's like okay with it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, from a business standpoint, it just seems like he's kind of getting taken advantage of.
Well, you also have to remember that Dino might have been in a position where he had to sort of take advantage of Lynch in that situation. I'm not saying that he did, but he had, because Dune just bombed.
Yeah.
That was maybe tens of millions of dollars that were lost, right? Which is a lot, which is like $100 million now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, we'll get to it when we talk about Wild at Heart and Twin Peaks. David didn't work with Dino after Blue Velvet because Dino ran out of money. So also, and I have empathy with both sides. Like, I understand, like, a director I need final cut. I understand that more, but I understand a studio being like you have to trust us that you're not going to give it, because if you have final cut, you can just give us a 4-hour movie and we're like, fuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like with I mentioned the Snyder Cut earlier. I don't know if I cut it out or not, but that movie's 4 hours long.
Yeah.
I think the best part of that movie, I think the best version of that movie is like 3 hours and 15 minutes long, right? Warner Brothers originally cut it to under 2. They did reshoots and cut it to under 2 hours, which is insane. And then Zack Snyder made it 4 hours because he was like, well, I have creative control now. I'm going to make it as long as I want.
Yeah.
Where in the reality, the best part of it, I believe, was in the middle of those two extremes. So I understand both sides of like that whole final cut scenario.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I wouldn't, if there was a law passed that said, hey, the director has final cut over the movies now, I'd be like, all right, let's see it. But if it was like studios have final cut, the director will never get final cut again, I'd be like, fuck.
Yeah, well, movies are,
Yeah. What do we got next?
In August 1985, filming on Blue Velvet began in North Carolina with Kyle MacLachlan, Laura Dern, Dennis Hopper, and Isabella Rossellini in the main cast.
So Kyle MacLachlan got the script while he was filming Dune. David's like, here you go. And he goes, oh, nice. So he reads it and goes, cool. I'm going to star in this? And he's like, yes. And he goes, sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then he shows his dad. He's like, hey, Dad, I'm going to star in this. You want to read it? And the dad's like, sure. And the dad's like, whoa, this is a crazy script. And he goes, yeah, right. And then Kyle gave it to his mom. And then his dad, like, slaps him on the back of the head. Like, you gave that to your mom? Why would you make her read that, dude? It's sort of like making my mom watch Eraserhead with me.
Yeah.
Laura Dern talked about how I'm only bringing this up because it's very relatable to us. Laura Dern goes in. She was like 17 or something like that, 17 or 18. And she meets David Lynch and Kyle MacLachlan for the first time. They go to Big Boy's, I think it was Big Boy's Diner, where Lynch frequented a lot during this time. Like, he went there every day. She goes there, and Kyle and David's writing down on a napkin and shit, like writing down. And Kyle is like, making like horses and stuff with his ketchup with like a fork. And like the whole time they're just like fidgeting and doing stuff while they're talking. And that reminded me of a time where your girlfriend Kat, we were talking about whatever project we were working on, and like you had a balloon with glitter in it, and you're like shaking it as we were talking, and I had like a little cat toy that I was spinning like a roll of tape with, and we were just talking like having a serious conversation while doing the most ridiculous fidgety stuff, and your girlfriend Kat was Laura Dern in that situation. I was David Lynch because I'm better than you, and you're Kyle MacLachlan
because I'm handsome.
Fuck. That actually works out perfectly.
Fitting, yeah.
We're actually better than them.
Mm-hmm. You're actually a little crazier than David Lynch.
Okay, pal. He probably has better hair than me though.
Yeah, he's got cool
hair. I
hair.
have big dumb hair.
He's got cool hair. Definitely got.
And
cool
also
hair.
he can talk to girls.
Yeah. He's a little. I'm thinking he's a little better than
he
you.
might be so much better than me. Also, I'll put in the video of me and Danny.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
So Dennis Hopper, at this point in his career, I talked about Easy Rider earlier. He directed Easy Rider, so he was very influential on the independent film scene. And he was also, if you would recognize him in Apocalypse Now, he plays the photojournalist who's at what's Marlon Brando's name in that movie? Kurtz, Sergeant Kurtz, Captain Kurtz, whatever Kurtz. He's at Kurtz's compound at the end, and he's like, "You don't understand, man. This is crazy." Like he's going nuts. And he was very involved in like the LSD scene and in Hollywood. He made a movie. I think he was in this movie, Roger Corman movie called The Trip, which I've seen, that starred Henry Fonda as well. I think Dennis Hopper had a small role in that. But he was, he went to rehab for I think drugs and alcohol around like the late 70s, or no, maybe early 80s. I don't know exactly when the timeline was, but it was sometime very recently before Blue Velvet where he just got out of rehab, and he sort of lost his credibility in Hollywood, and they weren't really sure, like, hey, should we cast him or what? Yeah. So many people tested for the role of Frank Booth, but then ultimately, it went to Dennis Hopper, and Dennis Hopper. Lynch goes. Dennis Hopper calls him. He goes, "You don't understand. Like he did a Kate Winslet on Titanic, where she's like, 'I am Rose,' and Cameron was like, 'Okay, you're Rose.'" Hopper calls up Lynch and he goes, "Hey, you don't understand. I am Frank Booth."
Yeah.
And he goes, "All right, cool." And he hangs up the phone. And like David's all white, and they're at Big Boy's Diner, and he's all white in the face, sitting with like the production team. And they're like, "What happened, David?" He goes, I got good news and bad news." And they go, "Tell us the good news." And he goes, "Dennis Hopper just told me he's Frank Booth." And they go, "What's the bad news?" And he goes, "Dennis Hopper just told me he's Frank Booth." He's like, "I don't know if I want to have lunch with this guy," which I thought was funny. Lynch, the one thing that Dennis Hopper kind of contributed to the movie before they were filming is in the script. I think Lynch had either in the script or Lynch told him in pre-production what he breathes in, what he's huffing. Frank Booth is huffing throughout the script is helium. So in Lynch's mind, it wouldn't be Pabst Blue Ribbon, fuck that shit, or no, Heineken, fuck that shit, Pabst Blue Ribbon. It would be Heineken, like that kind of thing. And he was like, "David, that might be too silly. What if it's like what is it, amyl nitrate or not nitrous oxide?" And David's like, "What's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's awesome, dude." Yeah. He's like, it enhances whatever's going on. It gives you a disorienting feeling and this this strange euphoria. And so David was like, "All right, let's do that." And then later, like a few years later, Dennis Hopper was thinking like maybe it would have been fun, like maybe it would have been extra scary if like I had a, like when he was saying "baby wants to fuck," if he wasn't going "baby wants to fuck," it was "baby wants to fuck."
Yeah,
it would have been creepier. That's just what I've heard. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Isabella Rossellini, we talked about her in the Martin Scorsese podcast because she was like the world's biggest model at the time, and Scorsese was married to her from like 1977 to 1980, let's say. And David didn't know her, and then he ran into her at dinner, and he was thinking for Dolores, he wanted Helen Mirren in the role. And Isabella Rossellini was just in a movie with Helen Mirren, I believe. And so David runs into Isabella at dinner, and they end up sitting next to each other. And he's like, "Hey, you worked with Helen Mirren, right?" And she goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Can you get her my number? Can I get her number from you?" And she goes, "No, I'm not gonna give you." Because no, it's for a movie role, not because And she's like, "No, I can't give it to you." And he's like, "I have a role for her. Like, I want to put her in a movie." And she goes, "Well, no, I'm not. No, I'm not gonna give you because she sort of like wanted the role.
Yeah, yeah.
And so she's like, I'm not gonna give. That's weird. I don't really know her that well. And he's like, please, like the whole night. He's like, come on, just give me the goddamn. And she's like, no, I'm not gonna give you. He's like, well, shit. All right, fine. And then the next day, she's like, all right, I'll never see that guy again. And then he sent her the script for Blue Velvet, and he's like, yeah, maybe you should play this role instead if I can't get Helen Mirren. Or no, it was just you should probably play the role because he had an epiphany. Like, wait, she was really good. Rossellini asked because she didn't really know. She knew he was a director and she wanted to be in movies, but she didn't know much about David Lynch, and so I guess she was still friendly with Scorsese, and this is like a few years after they divorced, and she goes, "Hey Marty, what do you think about David? He offered me a role in his movie. What do you think about David Lynch?" And he said, "Just watch Eraserhead. Just watch Eraserhead. Just watch Eraserhead. It's amazing."
You always have to do the laugh.
I'm going mad with power because I think I perfected the laugh.
Yeah, yeah.
She's like, just watch Eraserhead. Just watch Eraserhead. And she did, and she was like, okay. But it's what you were about to mention another scene before?
Oh, when Frank Booth basically, I guess you would call it a sex scene the first time when Colin McLaughlin's character's like spying.
Peeping.
Yeah, peeping, and then he sees her like basically get beat up and
Assaulted, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first scene that Isabella Rossellini and Dennis Hopper had with each other.
Oh my, yeah.
And they were both kind of like nervous or whatever. And also it was I don't know if it was his very first time because Dennis Hopper starred in his first movies after he got out of rehab were Blue Velvet, Hoosiers, I don't know how to say that, and River's Edge. I don't know which one of those three he filmed first, but if he filmed Blue Velvet first, then this would be his first scene acting since he got out of rehab. And Isabella Rossellini was naked under the robe. Like her back's to us, so we don't see it, but to him, he could just see her fucking vagina.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's trying to like make him feel better, going like, I'm sorry, like you have to do this or whatever. And he just goes, I've seen it before.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
referring to her,
Uh-huh.
Which I thought was funny. David Lynch's marriage to Mary Fisk, who is Jack Fisk's sister, I mentioned, fell apart during this shoot because David fell in love with Isabella Rossellini, and they started dating and stuff like that. And Brad Dourif, who was in Dune, and you might recognize him as the stuttering guy from Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm.
He plays one of the Frank Booth's goons in this. And he goes, yeah, I watched David Lynch fall in love with Isabella Rossellini on the set.
Oh, really? Just throughout the whole...
But Mary Fisk was like, sort of like, oh yeah, he's filming this movie because again, she's not there a lot, so she's like, yeah, he's filming this movie. Isabella is there. Yeah, it's probably fine, because she understands like what's going. Like, she understands that he's a director in Hollywood working with actresses and like, these production assistants and stuff like that. Like she understands that women love David Lynch. He's catnip for women. So she wasn't like totally naive to it, but she goes, yeah, I didn't think anything was wrong, and then I met Rossellini on the set, and then I just saw her. And how David would talk to her, and I go, "Oh my god!"
Oh no!
And then they eventually got divorced. So, and at this point, this is the entrance of Angelo Badalamenti, who of course did all the music for Lynch's work after Blue Velvet. So what happened is this guy Fred Caruso. They were trying to figure out the Blue Velvet song that Dolores would sing. Isabella Rossellini would sing it live, and they had the band, but they couldn't really get it to work. He goes, David's like, it doesn't sound the same. It turns out the band was practicing another version of the song that was wrong, and they're like, well, what are we gonna do? And Fred Cruz was like, hey, I got my friend Angelo. He can come in and help us out. And he's like, who's it? No, we don't need anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tried again. It doesn't work. And he's like, David, it's not going to cost anything. Like I can bring in my friend Angelo. He's like, yeah, fine, bring him. So then Angelo, starts coming on set or whatever, and David's like, this jerk, whatever. He's coming on my set telling me how to run things. And Angelo works with Isabella for, however long, and he gives David Lynch a tape, and he goes, it is what it is, listen to it. And David Lynch is like, kind of staring him down like, give me that. And then he plays it, and he's like, holy shit, this is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was basically the start of their collaboration. Of just, actually, you're the best guy of all time.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't hate you anymore.
Mm-hmm. And they just work together on every single movie since.
Yeah, I mean, he did the score to Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm. And or straight story.
Straight people.
It's a straight story.
The gay story.
Just a gay story.
So filming wraps. They do their first in-house crew screenings, just not, people who worked on the movie. And Dino loves it, Dino De Laurentiis. And he goes, this might be a crossover film. This might have art house appeal and mainstream appeal, which is like the golden thing. And so he goes, all right, let's do a test screening. We're going to do a test screening to audiences at a theater that has been showing Top Gun. I don't know if it was test screenings of Top Gun or like actual showings of Top Gun. It was 1986. I believe they both came out. But they go, all right, let's do that. Let's try to see if it has mainstream appeal. And Lynch was he stayed home and like looked after somebody's kids at Kyle MacLachlan's place. Or no, Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern got together on the set of Blue Velvet, and they had their own place together. And he was staying there, and so he gets a call from like his agents, and they go, "Dude, the screening went great. It was excellent. The movie's great. Don't even worry about it. Like you're dynamite." And he goes, "Nice." So he hangs up the phone and goes to bed. Or no, and then before he goes to bed, Diane Ladd, who is Laura Dern's mother, who's also an actress, who he would work with in Wild at Heart, which we'll get to. Her and her friends come home, and they're sort of like silent and not saying anything. And Lynch is like, oh, that's weird. Okay. And then so he goes to bed, and then the next morning he gets a call from Dino, and he goes, David. He goes, how are you? He goes, hey, Dino, I heard the screening went great. And he goes, I give you to Larry. And the guy, head of distribution, Larry, calls, and he goes, hey, Larry, I heard the screening went great. Huh? He goes, no, well, not so much, David. And he goes, what do you mean? And he goes, David, worst test audience screening I've ever been to. A complete disaster. And he goes, come on, it can't be that bad. And he starts reading out the scorecards that people gave. And the first one says, David Lynch should be shot. And he's like, God damn it.
Damn it.
What's the best part? The end. The dog, Sparky, biting on the water. Like that kind of stuff. And he's like, God damn it.
Damn.
And so they kind of scaled back the release of it after that, where they're like, all right, maybe this doesn't have mainstream appeal.
I mean, but it's hard to say because, like, if it was an audience that watched Top Gun, yeah. Totally big switch up.
Right. I don't know if it was telling people. I can't imagine it was telling people, hey, you're about to see Top Gun. And then they show them Blue Velvet. I think it was just people who are more inclined to go see those types of screenings, maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know exactly how it worked, but yeah. So I believe they scaled back the release of it.
On September 19th, 1986, Blue Velvet was released in the U.S. and was a critical hit and received B- cinema score from audiences. It grossed $8 million domestically off a $6 million budget and earned Lynch another Oscar nomination for Best Director.
So, adjusted for inflation, this is like a $17 million movie coming out and making $30 million domestically. It could have made more because we don't know the worldwide numbers. So it's pretty much a soft success. And also this has made its budget and then some in like ancillary markets after, like, home video and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who like this movie and have been watching it over the years. It has a lot of longevity to it. I mentioned that the movie restored Hopper's credibility, Dennis Hopper. And the best story I found from like just the release of this movie was David Lynch was at the Oscars because he was nominated, right? And Elizabeth Taylor was presenting the Best Director award. And so he's, waiting, not expecting to win. And she goes, and the winner is 1989, it was Platoon. Oliver Stone for Platoon. And then everybody's clapping, and Oliver Stone goes up there, and Elizabeth Taylor like kisses Oliver Stone on the lips. And he's like, holy shit. And then so later, after David goes to an after party, and he sees Angelica Houston, who I know from a movie called Gardens of Stone. I want to say she was in the Addams Family just because she looks like she was. I don't know if she was. But she's John Huston's daughter. John Huston, when we did our Paul Thomas Anderson podcast, he made that documentary "Let There Be Light" that inspired The Master, about those soldiers coming back from war and having post-traumatic stress disorder, but there was no medical term for that. So like there were, just look up "Let There Be Light." It's a great documentary, and he's also made a bunch of other great influential movies. And she goes, "Hey, David, my dad." Angelica Houston goes up to him at the after party and goes, "Hey, my dad's back, in the back room. He wants to meet you, or he wants to see you because he already met him at one point." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I'll go see John." Like, yeah. So he goes back there and he sees John. He goes, "Hey John, how are you?" And then he sees that John Huston sitting next to Elizabeth Taylor, who's like the biggest, who she was like the biggest movie star on the planet for a while. And David walks in. She goes, "I love Blue Velvet." And David goes, "You know, it's a shame I didn't win because I really wanted to kiss you."
Oh,
And she goes, "Come here." And he kisses her.
of course.
Dude,
Yeah.
he was slick with it.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Also, so there was over an hour of deleted scenes that were thought to be just lost to history. Like Kubrick, he would just destroy his film that he didn't use for the movie. He'd just destroy the deleted scenes.
Yeah.
But somehow the deleted scenes for Blue Velvet, because the original cut was like every original cut for every movie is 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was a lot of scenes that they cut out, and then they thought they were lost to history. And then recently, in 2014, which is 11 years ago, so not recently, they made a thing like Blue Velvet, the lost footage, and it's a compilation of all those scenes and stuff like that. So that came out around the same time they did Twin Peaks: The Missing Pieces, which is a feature film length thing of deleted scenes from the movie Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talked about David Lynch's early life in the beginning of this podcast, we mentioned how, there was this, he grew up with this very white picket fence, suburban, idyllic lifestyle. This, he calls it the chrome optimism of the 50s, and how he sensed or wanted or desired or something, some kind of darkness or strangeness or weirdness behind that kind of facade of paradise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this movie, he's sort of mulling over and sort of thinking about and picking apart that kind of whole concept, because you see in the beginning of this movie, we get exactly his upbringing and his childhood. It literally, the first shot I think is, was it red roses with the white picket fence in the background? There's sprinklers going, the grass is all green, all the colors are very saturated and exaggerated,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also see the firemen waving with the Dalmatian on the fire truck in the beginning, and also they shot that in slow motion, and that's actually in slow motion. So the guy in real life isn't going 1, 2, 3. He's going, like this. And they just slowed it down, and it's like it's not a satire, but it's a very surreal feeling, a surreal interpretation of that kind of culture in that community and that kind of upbringing. And then after Jeffrey's dad like sprains his neck, I don't know what injury he got. What was it? Like he sprained his neck or like messed it up somehow when he was tugging on the rope.
Yeah.
And then he's like, having almost like a seizure on the ground, sort of. And the dog's that's such a nice touch. The dog biting the hose, the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's also David Lynch's dog Sparky.
Oh, really?
End of the podcast. So, but then the camera goes under into the ground, and under this veneer of paradise or whatever. If you go into the underbelly of this community, there's these roaches just crawling over each other en masse, and they're disgusting. They're these giant pests underground, and I think that's basically obviously symbolic of the criminal underbelly and the criminal underworld of Lumberton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's represented by Frank Booth and and his goons, and the mystery that Jeffrey stumbles into later when he goes into Dolores's or Dorothy's apartment. I forget the name. And I think it's also symbolically consistent and metaphorically consistent that he disguises himself as pest control and exterminator when he enters that mystery, when he goes into that apartment, basically saying like, "Hey, I'm here to get the pests out."
Mm-hmm.
Get the criminals out, right? Because that's ultimately what he does by the time we get to the end of the movie when he solves the mystery. The whole criminal underbelly in the town is completely uprooted and exterminated, right? And the whole thing, like showing the bird at the end, the little puppet bird that has the roach in his mouth, is basically saying like, "Hey, we got him." Because I think Lord, I forget whenever people have monologues in movies, I tend to kind of tune them out because they're just not my cup of tea. When they're like, "And I had a dream, and in the dream," like that kind of thing. I try to pay attention as much as I can, but she said something about like when my life is fulfilled, all those robins will fly out and it'll be wondrous and optimistic and that kind of thing, and that showing the bird with the roach in the mouth is showing her and Jeffrey and the good in the town to sort of overcome the pest in the town, and the criminals in the town. And obviously, Blue Velvet is David Lynch dealing with that concept probably in the most direct way. And I don't know if that came from an actual experience he had where he like got to the bottom and came to terms with whatever darkness he experienced when he was younger. Because we talked about, him him and his brother were walking downtown. I'm just having a nice time with my brother, and all of a sudden a naked woman comes out of the woods, all beat up and assaulted. It takes a dark turn, right? Or his dad shooting the porcupine or whatever other, or or the kid. Maybe not dark, but the strangeness of it when he went to the kid's house to eat the candy bars. The mentally handicapped kid. He's 20 years old. And I don't know if it's him coming to terms with that, or if it's because it ends on a very optimistic note with Isabella Rossellini in The Sun, where it comes from a desire for Lynch to sort of root out and deal with this darkness that he experienced when he was a kid, and sort of getting and compensating for the fact that he didn't get to when he was a kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was it. I didn't really think about it like the exterminator part, but that does seem to hold a lot more weight now that I think about it.
And I don't know if that's because that happened to Lynch, or if that's coming from a subconscious desire of he wishes he can root out that darkness that he felt in his upbringing. Let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might have some kind of desire like that because it is one of his most optimistic endings.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, if Lost Highway isn't optimistic at all. Mulholland Drive's definitely not. Twin Peaks, no.
Mm.
Inland Empire, yes. Straight Story, yes. So let's say half and half. Wild at Heart's optimistic too. If you think about it, most of his movies have optimistic endings.
Mm-hmm.
There's only really 3. Fire Walk with Me. Even there's also a hope of optimism in that too. Not really, but sort of. Anyway, what do you think about this movie? I'm sorry. I hope that made sense.
No, that made I didn't hold as much weight on the exterminator part. I think I was just trying to process what was taking place as he was hiding and all that kind of stuff. This movie did a really good job at making me feel super uncomfortable and putting Kyle MacLachlan's character, what's his name in the Jeffrey, putting Jeffrey in that the whole scene where he goes and visits her, and then Frank Booth shows up and he drags him around town. That's a kind of feeling where it's super realistic. You could be totally put in that situation where you're just someone kidnaps you and just kind of drags you around town and you're kind of at their mercy. That for some reason the whole time I was just feeling so unsettled because it's just a nightmare situation to happen. I feel to me because I would hate to be in that situation and know you might die, but all these people around you are just making fun of your last moments or making a joke out of it. So I would that's the main thing that I came away with from this movie is that it again did a really good job at making me feel uncomfortable in a familiar setting, I guess. Because we kind of grew up in a sort of a town that was like this, not exactly as picture book as it is, but there's aspects to where we grew up that are similar.
Right, there's a lot of suburban aspects of our town and this town and Lumberton that overlap.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, yeah, I don't know.
You want to know my favorite joke in this movie? I think it's a joke too.
What?
There's a scene where when Dolores shows up naked. This isn't funny. This isn't the funny part. But they go inside, and Jeffrey sort of has to explain to Laura Dern what's her name? Fuck.
In the movie.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry, I forget her name. But he's trying to explain to Laura Dern's character, who he's supposed to have a romantic relationship with, that he's trying to sort of hide the fact that he has a romantic relationship with Isabella Rossellini. Dolores is Dorothy, not Dolores. So he's trying to get her all covered up, and she's like, Jeffrey. He keeps glancing at Laura Dern oh, this isn't, I don't know, she's crazy, cuckoo. And then he's like, I definitely don't really know her that well. And she goes, oh, Jeffrey, my secret love. And I'm like, holy shit, that's so funny. Yeah. It reminded me, there's a scene in Role Models that I quote all the time where the introduction to Elizabeth Banks' character in that movie is that she's a lawyer. And she goes, I don't know what we can do, Mr. Garvey. I mean, the evidence they have against you is pretty concrete. And he goes, what evidence? And they show like security cam footage of clearly him and a bunch of guys like stealing TVs. He goes, that could be any bald guy. And then the audio from the security cam goes, look at me, Steve Garvey, stealing TVs.
Yeah.
And he's like, that stopped me. That reminded me of that scene, which is funny.
Twin Peaks, 1990 to 1991. Between Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, Lynch again tried to get Ronnie Rocket made and another mystery called Up at the Lake. But his life changed when he met writer Mark Frost to work on adapting a book called Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe.
So Frost and Lynch were brought on to write The Goddess together. And, they were writing on it and it didn't really, materialize. They sort of lost interest in it. But then after they were sort of done with that, Lynch goes, hey, Mark, you ever do a comedy? And he goes, yeah, I'll do a comedy. Like, yeah, why not? And he goes, well, I got this idea for a script called The One Saliva Bubble. And he goes, well, okay, what's it about? And it's like, it's about these guys. They're at like a government facility. And one of them is talking and the saliva bubble comes out of his mouth and it floats like down the hall. And it ends up getting into the circuitry of some sort of like weapon system. And it like wreaks havoc on this town and shit like that. It's insane. It would look
dirty bubble.
Yeah, it's maybe the dirty bubble, exactly. So they were like very close to making it. They had everything lined up. All they needed was the green light to film. Martin Short and Steve Martin were going to star in it. And he was like, Dino, we're ready, huh? We're going to film the movie. He's like, I don't have any money left.
Dang.
He didn't have any money, so they didn't get to make the plug was pulled. And also, Dino didn't want to give up the rights. Or he just didn't. So like, they couldn't go to another studio with the project, so it was kind of just dead in the water. So enter a guy named Tony Krantz, who is an agent at CAA, and he goes to Mark Frost and Lynch. Mark Frost had experience writing in television before, and he goes, you know what you guys should do? You should write a TV show together. And they're like, oh, really? David's like, oh, I never considered TV. Maybe maybe we'll give it a try. So they just, start spitballing ideas. Like, let's give it a try. So Lynch goes over to Mark Frost's house. Mark Frost lived off of Mulholland Drive. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, my God.
So Lynch goes there. He gets in a car accident, loses his memory. No, I'm kidding. So he goes over there, and he also had this, Mark Frost had this couch that it would look like a therapist's couch. So it looked like he was typing down all of my problems because I was just laying on the couch and he was like dictating. So you spend however many weeks like writing a script, let's say. And then they finish the script at like 10 o'clock at night, and Lynch goes, all right, they both gave themselves a copy, and Lynch goes, all right, I'm going to go home. I'll probably read this tomorrow, and I'll let you know what I think. And Mark Frost was like, okay, makes sense. And so David Lynch goes home. It's like 10:30. He's about to go to bed. And he's like, all right, let me just read the script really quick. And he goes, and I'm reading this thing. And I go, you know what? This is actually pretty good. And so he calls Mark Frost, and he goes, Mark, this thing is pretty good, right? He goes, I know. Well, I know. What the hell? Like, why is it so good? This shouldn't be this good.
They just didn't realize.
Yeah. So then, they eventually got the green light to make it.
Filming the pilot took place in early 1989 in Washington State with Kyle MacLachlan, Michael Ontkeen, Jack Nance, Peggy Lipton, Everett McGill, and more in the main cast.
So Frank Silva, who plays Killer Bob in the show, he wasn't supposed to be in the show. What happened was he was the set decorator, like the production. He was on the production designing team. I don't know exactly what role he had, but he was this guy. He was maybe in his 50s. He sort of had tan skin, and he had white hair. And he kind of looked like a creepy guy, right? And also, apparently, by all accounts, he was the nicest guy of all time. And so he was moving a dresser in Laura Palmer's room set. And he was sort of like moving it through the door in a way that, something happened and the lady goes, don't lock yourself in there, Frank. Like, don't trap yourself in there. And Lynch goes, wait, Frank should be in this. And he goes, Frank, are you an actor? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, you're going to be in the show. And he goes, not great. What am I going to do? And he goes, I don't know yet. But he goes, I got something. So what they did is he goes, hey, we're going to pan around the room. Like the camera's going to go in a circle. Just crouch under at the end of the bed there and just look through the bars of the bed frame and just like smile like that. And like kind of gnash your teeth and, and he goes, all right. And they film that shot and Lynch goes, all right, we're going to use this somehow. I don't know how, because that character was not in the script to a certain extent. And then later, the end of the episode ends with Grace Zabriskie, who was in Wild at Heart, who we'll talk about in a couple minutes. Her character has like a vision of somebody picking up Laura's necklace in the woods. And also that moment is like the scariest thing. I was so scared when I first saw that a few years ago. And so she like kind of is leaning and she kind of does an Undertaker and like kind of sits up and he goes, Laura! And like screams. And it's a kind of a complicated shot because they have to get the timing right. She has to scream properly. And the focus puller has to get her in focus the whole time. And David Lynch, they pull it off and they go, cut, we got it. Great. That was great. And then the DP, I think it was maybe Freddie Elms at this point, or maybe Freddie Francis, rather, goes, no, David, not great. You could see Frank in the reflection in the mirror there.
Oh.
And he goes, perfect. Because Frank was in the show now as sort of like a...
Oh, okay.
As somebody who wasn't a physical being.
Okay, yeah.
To a certain extent. So it was perfect. I heard a story that David saw him in a mirror in the background of a shot while they were filming and went, fuck! And that's why he cast him. But apparently that's not true. I don't know where I heard that. But the Red Room, which is basically a sort of another dimension. It's sort of like an evil dimension under Twin Peaks, let's say. That was not in the script. Because that showed that the whole Red Room concept came up in episode 3, which they did not have the script for when they were editing the pilot, right? So to a certain extent. So they were editing the pilot once, and David Lynch says I got the idea for the Red Room. We were editing, and we went out into the parking lot to take a break, and there was a red car, and I just kind of laid down flat on the car. I bent down and I kind of laid my torso on the car and stretched my hands over it, and I just kind of felt the warm red. And that's where I got the idea for the Red Room, and as this sort of like other dimension place where people talk backwards. Because what they did in the show, because you didn't get a chance to watch it because it was just so there's so much, so many hours of footage to watch. But in the Red Room, everybody in there except for the main character who was like who walked into that scene, like Cooper for example, they talk normally, but everybody in there also talks normally, but what they did is they recorded their lines backwards and then played them forwards. So it's like instead of saying I am the arm, you hear I am the arm.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing.
They do that in Firework.
They did that, yes. Oh yeah, you watched Firewalk with Me.
Parts,
yeah. Yes.
There's still parts that
Yes, exactly. I forgot about that. So you watched Firewalk with Me, so great. So you know what that is. And he also came up in that moment of laying on the car of Cooper being trapped in there for 25 years. Laura goes, I'll see you in 25 years. Which is astounding because they actually made that work. It's crazy because I was just a random. He's like, I didn't know. It was just a random thing I put in there.
And
then they ended up doing the Twin Peaks Return series that takes place 25 years later.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting. Mike Anderson, the guy who played the arm in the suit, who's like dancing in the show. He's the little small guy. The reason that Lynch kind of came across him is because he wanted him to play Ronnie Rocket in case they ever made a Ronnie Rocket movie. Because, of course, Ronnie Rocket's supposed to be 3 feet tall, wears a red pompadour, and runs on alternating current and electricity. Mike Anderson, he thought, would be very good for that. Also, in Hollywood, David Lynch met the Dalai Lama, and he was very captivated by his story and very empathetic to his cause, and he started reading a lot about the history of Tibet. So he ended up putting a lot of that into the story of Twin Peaks, especially with Dale Cooper. He was in between scenes, or in between events in the series, he'll be in his hotel room just reading about Tibet. And then there's one sequence where he's teaching everybody about Tibet in the show. He's like, this is the country of Tibet. It has to do something with has something to do with the plot as well. So that Lynch got fired up. He's like, I want to put Tibet in here.
Yeah,
Tibet's the best. And actually, there's also I'll get to that later. Tibet is going to come up later when I mention Dale Cooper. Just remember that, okay? So Angelo Badalamenti, who did the music for Blue Velvet, or who started to work with David Lynch on Blue Velvet, rather. David Lynch goes, what can you give me as a theme for the show? And he goes, oh no, let me come up with something. He does like do 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 do, and then David was like, he started crying. He said, that's fantastic. He goes, really? And Angelo was like, it kind of sucks. I don't know why you like it so much. He goes, no, don't change it. And he's like, you don't want me. This is like crayon to me. This is like writing a crayon to me. He's like, no, don't touch it. Yeah. And so Angelo just doesn't like it, and David Lynch thought it was a bit. And I love the music.
That's what. There's like a behind the scenes thing of Angelo talking, and he's like, I know I'm done with something because he just says, yeah, that's perfect. And then
Yeah.
he'll never like tweak it. Like if he says it's done, he never tweaks it,
Mhm.
which is kind of crazy.
In the contract, because I think this is a common thing that studios did back then, is they would have you film like 20 minutes of an ending for the pilot, so that they can release it as a movie in Europe and kind of recoup some of their investment. And so they filmed an international cut, which I don't think I've seen, and it's just an additional 20 minutes from I think episode 2 maybe, or episode 3,
Hmm.
that like revealing who the killer is.
Oh, it like wraps the whole thing up.
Right. I don't think it shows you. Spoiler alert. I don't know if you haven't seen Twin Peaks while you're watching this, but it wasn't spoiling that Leland was the killer. Leland Palmer, Laura Palmer's father, was the killer. It was spoiling that killer Bob, Frank Silva, who was the set decorator. Who Lynch was like, "Holy shit, you're scary as shit. I'm gonna cast you." It was revealing that he was the killer, but we still didn't know. There was still a lot of mystery about that guy, who he was, what his nature was. So in that international cut, it's just like a movie where they reveal the killer. So
On April 8th, 1990, Twin Peaks premiered on TV and quickly became a cultural phenomenon. After the first season's 8-episode run, ABC ordered 22 episodes for season 2.
So the first season is extremely successful. Of course, becomes a cultural phenomenon. And in the second season, the first half was very, very successful. It's just as good as the first, right? But what happened was there was pressure from the studio because they didn't want the audience to be too frustrated. There was pressure from the studio to sort of reveal who the killer was. Because the whole premise of the show is who killed Laura Palmer, right? And David Lynch wanted to push, withhold that information for as long as possible. And the studio was afraid that the audience would be like, fuck this, like this is taking too long. And they would abandon the show. So then eventually the studio won out, and I think it was the episode 10 or 9 maybe in season 2 maybe, somewhere around there, they revealed that Leland Palmer was the killer, right? And then around the same time that was happening, they also moved the show from Thursday night to Saturday night. And a lot of the demographic of the show, and then the viewership went down, and also the ratings went down because they found out who the killer was. So people didn't want to watch anymore, and you could tell that they were stuck in like this sort of limbo when they were watching it. And also, I don't know why they ordered 22. There was nothing I found that explained why they ordered 22 as opposed to 8. Maybe that's just how TV was done back then. It was 22 episodes. What do you mean? That's what we always do, right? I think it would have benefited if the second season was just 8 episodes again, and then the third season was 8 episodes. And you could have had a better, what do you call it? Lynch went on David Letterman, and he goes, "Well, listen, I think the reviews have been going down for the show." And Letterman's like, "Oh, why is that?" And he goes, "Well, they put us on Saturday, where a lot of our demographic is out partying. Nobody wants to be home on a Saturday night, right? You know."
Yeah.
And so I heard, and he goes, "Well, what?" David Letterman goes, "Well, what time slot do you want it to play on?" And he goes, "I heard that Wednesday at 8 is very, very good. I hear," and it was just like the best one probably. And so he goes, "What I want you to do," Lynch said this to the audience and to everybody watching. "What I want you to do is I want you to write a letter to Bob Iger at ABC, who's the president, I think, at ABC at the time. Disney is the parent company to ABC. He goes, I want you to write a letter to Bob Iger and tell him I want Twin Peaks to be on a weekday." And I don't know, it didn't work, of course.
Yeah.
But also Bob Iger, he is the guy who he's fucking CEO of Disney now. And like the whole media thing. So like people blame him for messing up Star Wars and every franchise, right? So because he retired in like 2020, let's say, and then this guy Bob Chapek took over and did apparently bad, and then they got Bob Iger back. Who cares? So also one of the other reasons why the second season fell off a little bit, possibly one of the reasons, is because Lynch was working on Wild at Heart while the second season was sort of being written.
Okay.
So he didn't really have a lot of involvement in the writing of season 2 as well. But he did direct, I think, 3 episodes. And he directed the first episode of season 2, maybe like the second one or the 6th one, and then he directed the finale.
Okay.
So,
can I ask you?
Yes.
How So from like a perspective in 1991, wait, when did the second season come out? That
91.
was 91. So not from the perspective of a 1991 audience, but from you watching it now, did you feel like it fell off after the reveal? Like, were you less interested
Well,
after the reveal?
like I still really like the show, like,
Yeah.
because I like the characters a lot. But I was still totally aware. Like, we'll get into it more, but because it's basically like the whole point of the show is gone, and you can find them struggling to, like, they try to sort of leave the mystery still out there, but it didn't really work. So the final episode of season 2 aired on, I think, June 10th, 1991, and it was shortly canceled like a few days after. They just canceled the show. And I think within, what was it? It was within 2 months, production on Fire Walk With Me started. So they went from the show being canceled and having no script to filming.
To film.
Like in a very it was June to August, September. It's 2 or 3 months.
Wait, what year is this? Sorry.
91.
Oh. But, okay.
Fire Walk With Me came out in 92.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right.
So it's basically in less than a year they've made a movie, because they premiered it at Cannes as well. Cannes.
Mm-hmm.
Overall thoughts on the Twin Peaks series, which also for this, in 2 weeks I watched the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks. I watched the movie Fire Walk With Me. I watched The Missing Pieces, which was all the deleted scenes, which were like a feature length. And then I watched 18 episodes of the Return series that came out in 2017.
Yeah.
I bought this from Z to A, Twin Peaks from Z to A. This box set just came out on the 3rd. So what I did is on Paramount I watched seasons 1 and 2 in the movie, and then I watched the final series, the final season on the Blu-ray. Yeah. And it's I love the whole thing that it's about. I think especially the season 1 and a lot of season 2 I think is absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this in the same way sort of we talked about how Eraserhead was sort of maybe one of the first movies that helped, we sort of branch out into this awareness of like this more abstract movies and this abstract material. This sort of feels like this was one of the first shows that took a step forward into the TV we know today, where it's like it's less episodic and villain of the weeky and more of just like a movie, right? Like Sopranos, like coming out on HBO was like a big deal. Like that was a big step in TV. And I don't know how much of a step Twin Peaks was in comparison to Sopranos, but I know it's something similar. And I'm not going to act like I have a big understanding of what TV was back then, but I feel like a lot of TV was much more restrictive and constrained and more, I don't want to say one note, but something like one note than the TV we have today. And because there was less stuff you can do and get away with, and just less room for stylistic innovation and ingenuity and and diversity, I guess, stylistically. And I think Twin Peaks was it sort of pushed TV in a supernatural direction, because this was a big deal. This wasn't just like, oh yeah, it was pretty popular. It was like, no, it was a huge show. I think the pilot got like 34 million viewers.
Yeah, I think David Lynch mentioned something where it didn't get, like in a test screening, it got like poor or average reviews, and then the release was like astronomical numbers or something.
Well, it's like it started out, and the last half hour of the pilot, it just skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually watched this pilot years ago when I watched all of David Lynch's movies for the first time, and I watched the pilot, and it was like the best episode of TV I've ever seen in my entire life. I cried. The ending where Sarah Palmer goes, Laura, and then that hand grabs the necklace out of for some reason, like the sound effects and the whole thing, it just scared the shit out of me, and I got like a crazy feeling in my chest. I'm like, this is the best episode of TV I've ever seen, and I never fucking watched any of it afterwards. And I just never got around to it. So this gave me a really good excuse to do it. And now that I've watched the whole Twin Peaks saga, which we'll keep talking about in Fire Walk With Me and in the Return series at the end of the podcast, I think I'm considering doing a deep dive on Twin Peaks.
I would love
Just
that.
the whole thing.
I would love to dive into Twin Peaks, because I would say, I mean, now is a good time to say it, but the Fire Walk With Me was probably my favorite. of all the.
Oh,
like,
really?
That was the one that I just like.
Of all the movies you watched?
Yeah, that was the one I like connected with the most. So I was kind of disappointed that I didn't have the time to like dive into this
Right.
because I was trying to like do the math. Like, can I maybe try to watch it? And I was looking on like Reddit things, like how long does it take to watch? And then someone was like, you could probably do it in 2 weeks, but your hair will turn stark white.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, they're saying you're gonna turn into David Lynch if you watch it in like that.
Or Leland Palmer.
Yeah,
Because his hair, one of the things is that you didn't see that in the movie. In the movie, he has like the brown hair, and then in the show, I don't want to spoil it, but at a certain point, something happens and his hair just turns white overnight.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, Leland? And he's like, yeah, I don't know, it's white now. But
that's probably it too.
Yeah. So I don't want to spoil it too much for you.
That's okay.
But, I mean, you'll probably,
talking
honestly,
about it.
you don't remember half the stuff we say on the show anyway, so
I know.
you'll probably forget. I think Dale Cooper, is like one of the best characters in a TV show of all time. I love that guy. He's one of the sweetest characters ever. He's awesome. The premise of his character in the first season is, Twin Peaks is a very rural town, and he's coming from Philadelphia, the FBI. He's very, he's a city slicker type guy, and he comes in, and he's the nicest guy ever, and he's absolutely fascinated by this way of living. He goes, Diane, I've never seen so many trees in my life. This place is great, and the premise of his character is he enters this small town, and he's miles ahead of these people in terms of like the proficiency and his capability and ability at his job, which is like perceiving people and just the straight laced FBI special agent. He's the best, and there's so many like excellent scenes of characters he's never met before where. Like we've gotten previous scenes of like, let's say, Big Ed Hurley and Norma, played by Peggy Lipton. They're in like a love affair, and Ed will walk out of the room, or Ed will be talking to Peggy Lipton or Norma, and then Norma will walk out, and Dale Cooper will just go, "So Ed, how long have you been in love with Norma?" Like that kind of thing. Like, how did you know that? And there's a really good scene. I remember this from the pilot, which I really liked. And it's so simple, and it might just be me putting too much on it, but there's a great scene where they're talking to Bobby because they're suspecting that he might have killed Laura Palmer. He's like, I didn't kill her, man. What the hell is this? Like that kind of thing. And there's a scene where he goes, tell us, Bobby, like, what do you think about this? Where were you the night this happened? And he's typing something up, and he slides the whatever he's typing over to Sheriff Truman, and it just says he did not do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it just displays his efficiency, proficiency, and it's like, he's the nicest guy ever.
Mm-hmm.
There's another FBI agent played by Miguel Ferrer, Albert Rothstein or Rosenstein, who comes in. He's like, I hate these people. Like, I hate this way of living. I like the city. So he's talking down to everybody like they're five. And there's one scene where he does this big speech, and he goes, Dale Cooper's like, you might not like these people, but these people have shown me nothing but the utmost kindness and respect, and I respect them in double in return, and like that kind of thing. Like, he's the best guy ever. And then in the beginning of season 2, where he thinks he might be dying, he's recording these tapes for Diane so he could send them back to her and like communicate with her. Diane is his like secretary back at the headquarters, and he's talking to like Diane about his life's regrets or whatever, and he goes, I hope the Dalai Lama gets to go back to his homeland. He's like dying. And he goes, I wish I would have been nicer to people. And it's like, you have no idea. You're the best guy ever.
Person.
I can't. There's such, and him and Sheriff Truman have such a great dynamic. And also the show is essentially like a drama, supernatural, sort of maybe sci-fi, sort of not, like soap opera. It's really, but it does feel like it's nudging the fringes or the boundaries of TV in a way towards where we are now with it. And also it does express, like with Blue Velvet, we talked about, this idyllic community. It's a very simple life, but there's something rotten and dark at the center of the town.
Really strange going on.
They do that specifically in this. It's a recurring theme where Cooper, Sheriff Truman, and Big Ed Hurley, and all these guys, Hawk, played by Michael Horse, they really trust Cooper and they really like him, and they go, listen, we trust you. We think you're a good man. They have like a secret society. It's not really a secret society. It's just like a fraternity club with guys in the town who are like, hey, look, this is a problem. We got to fix this. Not like, it's not anything sinister. And they invite him in, and they say, like, this town's great. There's great people. People like the way we live. It's a very simple, life and stuff. But there's just something about this town in the woods. There's something dark, and we don't know what it is. And of course, the whole darkness isn't just like Frank Booth, a bunch of criminals like in Blue Velvet, or it's not a serial killer like in any whatever. It's this, it's this this mystical, supernatural mythology of the White Lodge and the Black Lodge and Killer Bob and the Arm and a character who we'll meet later in the Twin Peaks. And I just think it's really, I was really impressed by the show. My parents loved it too.
That's
I was so, and watching it with my parents was also, I think I'm so glad I watched it with the whole thing, all of it with my parents, because I think I would have had probably a less enjoyable experience if I watched it just by myself. And also, like, there's in episode to episode, there's one character, like, you watch one episode and you go, fuck that guy. And the next episode, you're rooting for him, which is something that Lynch does so well. It's you can't just put all the credit on Lynch. It has to go to like Mark Frost and the people who directed the show, like Dwayne Dunham, who was the editor as well, who directed a few episodes. But that's that whole thing of attributing empathy to whatever character the writers wanted them to. And it's something that I think Lynch was missing a little bit in Lost Highway, which we'll talk about. But let me see if I have any more like funny things about. Okay. So I don't want to tell you what happens in season 2. You probably know, but if you're going to watch the series, I really want you to.
Yeah.
Also, I think Kat would love this show.
You think so?
Yes.
Is it spooky?
I think this show is full of stuff where she would go, "Oh my god!"
Definitely. Yeah.
Definitely. So there's Billy Zane, right? Who was in Titanic, which we talked about in our last episode. He was a guest star in I think 3 or 4 episodes in this near the end of season 2, right? And the second episode that he's in. Norma, I think Norma Jennings is her character, played by Peggy Lipton, who's having a love affair with Ed Hurley. Their relationship is great. Her ex-husband's a criminal, and there's a scene where she's basically displaying her loyalty to Big Ed rather than her criminal husband. And there's a fucking scene in he's in jail, and he goes, "Well, you're gonna leave me, Norma, so that you can go be Ed's whore?" And she goes, "I'd rather be his whore than your wife." And she walks out. Damn. And I go, "What?" Like, as I was hearing that line, I'm like an explosion went off in my brain. I'm like, "Phew," and I went back to Titanic, where Rose says that to Billy Zane, who's in that episode of Twin Peaks. Shit. So I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Did James Cameron see that episode and go, "I'm going to plagiarize this"? Or did Billy Zane go, "Hey, there was this one, if you need a line here, there's this one line." Yeah. But the line, I think I found the original script for Titanic, and the line is in there.
It's
It's in there. So I don't know how that is. That just the biggest coincidence of all time, or did Twin Peaks bleed into Titanic sometime?
I mean, that makes sense. You might be the first person to put that together, though.
We gotta call the Post. Where's Woodward and Bernstein? Shit. So yeah, I love this show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so and all like
if that is true. You probably are one of the first people to actually put that together.
I've looked it up, and it's all on Quora. Do you know what Quora is?
Yeah,
it's basically like Ask FM for dads.
You know, I know what that is because it's like it lets you like read parts of it, but then if you want to click more, you have to like sign in.
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna sign in.
I always try to read the first sentence.
Yeah.
My dad is always like, "I saw a thing on Quora the other day." He used to have a thing because okay, skip ahead 2 seconds if you don't care about this. But I swear this is funny. So I realized one time a few years ago that dads have their own side of the internet.
Yeah.
Where like you go on YouTube and you're like, the truth about Katy Perry or whatever bullshit, you know. But I remember going on my dad's YouTube once, and it was just everything that you have on your YouTube, but it's datified. Mm-hmm. So it said the truth about Katy Perry. It's like the truth about vinyl wood flooring. Stuff like that. I'm like, holy shit. So he had another thing. He had a website that he would go on to for a while where it was called wimp.com. And he would find all these memes and this is like 2013, 14, and he would find all these memes and videos. And he'd be like, "John, look at this thing.
Check this out."
Yeah, check this out. I'm like, "Yeah, that was cool when I saw it 4 years ago." Yeah. So it's just it's a very endearing and charming thing to see my dad so enthusiastic about like wimp.com or like the truth about vinyl wood flooring or Quora. It's really funny. Mm-hmm. I like it. So and also season 2 ended on a giant cliffhanger.
Oh, really?
And then the series got canceled.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, they didn't answer it at all.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, how much is the movie? I guess we can get into that.
We'll talk about it in the movie, but the movie's pretty much exclusively almost
just a separate thing,
a prequel, like before Twin Peaks even starts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can explain that more if you want later. But then they left that that was a cliffhanger for 25 years, over 25 years, until the Return series came out.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to talk about the Return series because I think I might like the Return series better.
Really?
Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to it's because they're so different. We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Okay.
If you guys like Twin Peaks, this is getting good.
This will get good eventually.
Yes.
No, it's been good.